Chapter 13:18. The pity in Su Ling's eyes stung Kasisna's already sensitive nerve. He stared at Su Ling with a ferocious look and let out a sharp roar. "You're a dying man. What right do you have to look at me like that?" With a roar, Kasisna rushed madly towards Su Ling. He gave up the advantage of long-range attacks and wanted to completely crush Su Ling in close combat. Facing Kasisna, who was rushing toward him, Su Ling exerted his demigod power almost without reservation. It turned into a sharp long saber and slashed at Kasisna. Clang! A round shield made of purple-black crystal appeared in front of Kasisna and blocked the saber from Su Ling. Both the long saber and the round shield were materialized by the demigod power of the same attribute. When they collided, they shattered almost at the same time. It did not have any effect on Su Ling and Kasisna. Not far away, Qinchuan looked at the scene in front of him and could not help but feel strange. In his opinion, whether it was Su Ling or Kasisna, their use of the demigod power was a little too shallow. It did not look like two demigods were fighting at all. I thought that the pressure of the demigod power should be vast and mighty, but now it seems that there is nothing special about it. Qinchuan was puzzled, but he could not ask Su Ling because he was worried that he would disturb Su Ling. At this time, Kasisna had approached Su Ling as he wished. He relied on his body, which was completely constructed by the power of the Void Law, to brutally collide with Su Ling. The demigod power of the two of them sometimes turned into sabers, spears, swords, halberds, shields, and iron fists. They kept attacking each other and were offset. Just when Qinchuan was puzzled, Su Ling suddenly transmitted a message to Qinchuan and answered Qinchuan's question. Although our use of demigod's power seems shallow, it is actually the most efficient way to fight with demigod's power. If we use demigod's power to launch a powerful killing move, it will only take 2 attacks at most for demigod's power to be exhausted. After hearing Su Ling's voice transmission, Qinchuan couldn't help but be enlightened. At the same time, he was also a little surprised. He didn't expect Su Ling to have the time to explain these things to him when he was fighting with Kasisna. Then, Su Ling said to Qinchuan telepathically, "Previously, in order to block the attack of the rune sword, Kasisna seemed to have only conjured a shield, but in fact, it consumed a lot of demigod power. You can't feel it, but I know very well that the previous shield and the shield he conjured later have completely different defensive abilities." Qinchuan was curious and asked, "Senior, what do you mean by telling me this?" Su Ling replied, "It's impossible for me to defeat Kasisna. I'm no match for him. All I can do is use my demigod's power to consume his and create an opportunity for you." Hearing Su Ling's answer, Qinchuan's expression instantly became serious. He said to Su Ling, "I see, Senior. When the time is right, I will take action." Su Ling's voice transmission to Qinchuan ended here. Next, he would focus on fighting with Kasisna and consume as much of Kasisna's demigod power as possible to create an opportunity for Qinchuan to kill Kasisna. As time passed, the battle between Su Ling and Kasisna became more and more intense. The use of demigod's power was no longer limited to the operation of ordinary conjured weapons, but a real high-intensity battle. Su Ling's figure flickered, and he pulled away from Kasisna. He let out a low cry, and his thin body instantly became even more shriveled. At the same time, a black and purple ball of light condensed in the palm of his right hand, exuding a pressure that made the universe tremble. Seeing this, Kasisna's face suddenly changed. He said coldly, "Are you crazy?" Su Ling did not respond to Kasisna's roar. He just focused on condensing the black and purple ball of light in his palm. When the black and purple ball of light became thicker and rounder, the surrounding space with Su Ling as the center began to shatter inch by inch. Damn it! When Kasisna saw this, he knew that Su Ling was going to go all out. Although he was extremely reluctant to use his demigod's power, in the face of Su Ling's desperate fight, He could only fight back with all his might. Void! Kasisna let out a low cry, and the demigod's power in his body surged out, turning into a black and purple ball of light in his palm that was almost the same as the one in Su Ling's hand. However, in comparison, the ball of light in Kasisna's hand was larger and thicker. In the distance, Qin Chuan saw this scene and could not help but feel a little uneasy. The demigod's power of Su Ling and Kasisna came from the same source, and Kasisna's demigod's power was obviously more than Su Ling's. In this way, Su Ling would definitely be at a disadvantage. Just as Qin Chuan was worried about Su Ling and Kasisna moved almost at the same time. They rushed to each other and threw the dark balls of light in their palms at each other. The two dark balls of light emitted a power fluctuation that seemed to destroy this space and fiercely collided with each other. At the moment of collision, although some of the power was offset by the fusion, most of the power collided and exploded. The terrible demigod's power swept in all directions. Qin Chuan was thousands of miles away, but he was still affected. He retreated hundreds of thousands of miles before he stopped. At this time, the space in front of Qin Chuan had completely turned into a black and purple world. The terrible and chaotic demigod's power filled it, destroying everything it encountered. The entire Tiger Fang star turned into dust at this moment and disappeared from this universe forever. Qin Chuan looked at the scene in front of him and was deeply shocked. A collision of this level was worthy of the name of demigod. Qin Chuan turned back into his human form and tried to enter this chaotic space. However, the demigod's power was too terrible. Qin Chuan only got a little closer and felt a chill in his heart. He had a hunch that if he dared to touch the demigod's power at this time, he might die. In desperation, Qin Chuan could only wait for this chaotic space to recover, and then enter it to look for Su Ling. As time passed, the chaotic space gradually stabilized, and the demigod's power that filled it gradually disappeared. Just as Qin Chuan was about to enter it to look for Su Ling's figure suddenly flew toward him from afar. It seemed that he was in a very bad state. Behind Su Ling, Kasisna, whose body was already broken, was chasing after him with murderous intent. Su Ling, you will die today. No one can save you. Chapter 13-19. Seeing this, Qin Chuan immediately stepped forward, wanting to protect Su Ling. However, Qin Chuan raised his hand and waved it. A black and purple diamond-shaped crystal immediately shot toward Qin Chuan. Seeing this black and purple diamond-shaped crystal, Qin Chuan's face suddenly became extremely ugly. He did not expect that after the collision just now, Kasisna still had the power of demigod. Even if this was only the most superficial use of the power of demigod, it was enough to deal with Qin Chuan. Run! Su Ling shouted at Qin Chuan, his face full of self-blame. Previously, in order to escape, he had been in a panic. He did not expect to run into Qin Chuan. If he had known that Qin Chuan was here, he would not have escaped from here. While speaking, Su Ling had already turned around and stood in front of Qin Chuan. He actually wanted to replace Qin Chuan to block the attack of the power of demigod this time. Seeing this, Qin Chuan's eyes widened as he roared. Realm of Woods! With Qin Chuan's roar, a dark green talisman formation suddenly appeared in front of Su Ling immediately. Towering ancient trees grew out of the talisman formation and condensed into shield walls in front of Su Ling. The diamond-shaped crystal formed by the power of demigod was like a sharp bullet, penetrating one shield wall after another. However, the speed at which it penetrated the shield wall was much slower than the speed at which the shield wall recondensed. Even when the diamond-shaped crystal was constantly consumed until it was only the size of a fingernail, it still could not get close to Su Ling. Even when the power of demigod completely collapsed, there were still 7 shield walls in front of Su Ling. A branch wrapped around Su Ling and sent him to Qin Chuan. Qin Chuan looked at Su Ling, who was extremely weak, and asked with concern, "Senior, are you all right?" Hearing Qinchuan's words, Su Ling shook his head and replied reluctantly, "Don't ask. Let's go." Su Ling knew Qinchuan very well. He knew very well that although Qinchuan had blocked Kasisna's attack just now, Kasisna would be prepared next time. Qinchuan might not be so lucky again. Just as Qinchuan was about to escape with Su Ling through space, Kasisna's figure suddenly appeared in front of Qinchuan. He raised his hand and punched Qinchuan's lower abdomen fiercely. In the face of this sudden attack, Qinchuan's face immediately became extremely distorted. He opened his mouth and spat a mouthful of blood. "You like to meddle in other people's business, don't you?" Kasisna, who only had his upper body left, stared at Qinchuan with extremely gloomy eyes and said coldly, "Then you might as well think about how to save yourself." As he spoke, Kasisna's figure had once again appeared in front of Qinchuan. He punched again and again, crazily attacking Qinchuan. Qinchuan tried to parry, but there was no way to resist Kasisna's attack at all. In just a moment, the wounds on his body that had already healed were torn open again, and golden blood flowed out again. "Die!" Kasisna growled, and a dagger materialized by the power of a demigod suddenly appeared in his hand. He accurately stabbed Qinchuan's heart. Whoosh! At this moment, a figure suddenly knocked Qinchuan away and took the blow for Qinchuan. The dagger stabbed into Su Ling's abdomen. At the same time, a small knife in Su Ling's hand, which was only the length of an index finger, hit Kasisna's eyes at the same time. "Ah ah ah!" Kasisna's screams resounded through the world. Qinchuan, who had been pushed away, looked at Su Ling's pierced figure. His pupils suddenly shrank, and he cried out involuntarily, "Senior! Go!" Su Ling had no strength to say anything else except the word "go." He had reached his limit. "Damn you!" Kasisna went completely crazy. He wanted to tear Su Ling into pieces. Bang! Kasisna punched Su Ling in the chest. Under the impact of this powerful force, fine cracks suddenly appeared on Su Ling's chest. These cracks gradually spread all over Su Ling's body, and Su Ling's vitality also collapsed. "Senior! No!" Qinchuan wanted to rush back and take Su Ling back from Kasisna's hands like a madman and maintain the integrity of Su Ling's body. However, Kasisna did not give Qinchuan the chance. He punched again and completely shattered Su Ling's body. "Now that I've dealt with this old guy, it's your turn next." Kasisna turned his head and looked at Qinchuan. His remaining eye was full of cold, killing intent. He wanted to kill Qinchuan, this annoying ant, and end all the humiliation of today. "Damn you!" Qinchuan's eyes were red as he glared at Kasisna. He rushed toward Kasisna, wanting to use the rainbow light of the talisman array to comfort Kasisna. However, Kasisna held a dagger made of demigod power and easily cut the rainbow light. "Although this is all I have left, it's more than enough to kill you." Kasisna stared coldly at Qinchuan. He sneered and also rushed at Qinchuan. Just as Kasisna was about to approach Qinchuan, lavender flowers suddenly grew out of his arms and waist. When he noticed the appearance of these flowers, Kasisna immediately felt that something was wrong. The next moment, he felt his thoughts and consciousness become chaotic. At the same time, a dazzling golden sword came from afar, easily tearing through Kasisna's back and piercing through his body. As the sword pierced through Kasisna's body, it suddenly disintegrated, turning into countless fine and sharp thorns that pierced into Kasisna's body. Kasisna's body was constructed from the power of the void laws. At this time, when it was attacked, it showed signs of instability, as if it would collapse at any time. This strong impact caused Kasisna's consciousness to instantly become clear. But before he could react, the lavender flowers that grew on his body released clouds of lavender mist, once again causing Kasisna's consciousness to become blurry. Kasisna was alarmed. He wanted to use his remaining demigod power to cut off the flowers on his body. However, in his confused state, He slashed again and again, but all of his slashes landed on his own body. He did not touch the flowers at all. What the hell is this? Kasisna was furious and scared. He had never encountered such a situation. If he had more demigod power, he would not have let his situation become so bad. Just as Kasisna wanted to struggle again, Qin Chuan had already arrived in front of him. He held the rune sword in his hand and cleanly pierced through Kasisna's body. Then, he lifted it up and cut Kasisna in two. Chapter 13:20. Die! Qin Chuan roared. He waved his rune sword again and cut Kasisna's body into pieces. He wanted to avenge Su Ling and give him a taste of his own medicine. In the blink of an eye, Kasisna's body had been cut into hundreds of pieces by Qin Chuan. Kasisna's vitality was also cut and scattered. Demigod Kasisna had fallen. Phew! Qin Chuan panted violently, his body trembling uncontrollably. Kasisna was dead, but Su Ling could not come back from the dead. Although Qin Chuan had only met Su Ling a few times, Su Ling had always answered Qin Chuan's questions. He was a senior that Qin Chuan respected very much. Now that Su Ling had died to protect him, Qin Chuan felt extremely guilty. Lu Zi and Zhou Lin slowly walked over from afar. They looked at Qin Chuan's sad expression and did not know how to comfort Qin Chuan. When they arrived, they happened to see Kasisna attacking Qin Chuan and Su Ling taking the hit for Qin Chuan. Qin Chuan, my condolences. Lu Zi pursed her lips. In the end, she decided to comfort Qin Chuan. She looked at Zhou Lin and motioned for Zhou Lin to comfort Qin Chuan as well. Zhou Lin looked at Qin Chuan and said, "The Void Empire still has 6 billion soldiers on the Devil Star. If you're really sad, then kill them all as a sacrifice to your senior." Lu Zi's expression changed when she heard Zhou Lin's words. It was the first time she had heard someone comfort someone like this. Hearing Zhou Lin's words, Qin Chuan slowly raised his head and looked at Lu Zi and Zhou Lin. He said in a low voice, "I'm fine. Thank you." Qin Chuan looked around and gently raised his hand. Grayish-white particles gathered from all directions and gathered in his hand. He looked at the ashes of Su Ling's body in his hand, and a touch of sadness flashed through his eyes. "Sorry, senior. I'm too useless." "Qin Chuan, don't blame yourself." Lu Zi looked at Qin Chuan's guilty look and felt very distressed. Kasisna was obviously not an ordinary opponent. Before they arrived, Qin Chuan had almost been beaten to the point that he could not fight back. Qin Chuan's strength. He had really tried his best. Qin Chuan glanced at Lu Zi and then at Zhou Lin. He asked, "Have the two of you reached the tribulation stage?" Lu Zi nodded and said, "Yes, senior sister and I have both reached the tribulation stage. We came back to share this good news with you, but we never thought—" Lu Zi's face became rather gloomy when she said that. At this moment, a figure flew over from afar. It was Galaska, who had left Tiger Fong with his clansmen long ago. "Qin Chuan." Galaska came to Qin Chuan's side and looked around with a sorrowful gaze. After confirming that he didn't see Su Ling, he burst into tears. Qin Chuan said in great sorrow when he saw Galaska sobbing, "I'm sorry." Galaska shook his head and said, "I don't mean to blame you. Before I left Tiger Fong's star with my clansmen, Su Ling told me that he might die this time. I'm already mentally prepared." "Then I just regret that I came too late and didn't get to see Su Ling one last time." Hearing Galaska's words, Qin Chuan slowly extended his right hand to Galaska and said, "These are senior's ashes." Looking at the small pile of ashes in Qin Chuan's hand, Galaska carefully reached out and took the ashes. He said to Qin Chuan gratefully, "Thank you. I thought there was nothing left of the void spirit. This is the last thing I can do for senior," Qin Chuan said in a low voice. "If senior hadn't saved me, I might have died." The moment when Su Ling pushed Qin Chuan away at the last moment was very crucial. If Su Ling had not pushed Qin Chuan away, Qin Chuan would have had a 90% chance of dying if he had been stabbed by Kasisna. After carefully putting away the ashes, Galaska said to Qinchuan, "There's one more thing. Su Ling told me before that if he dies and Kasisna survives, there will definitely be an internal conflict between Kasisna and Zidile. For a short period of time, neither Kasisna nor Zidile will have the time to care about anything else. However, if Kasisna dies, Zidile will become the one who benefits the most." Hearing Galaska's words, Qinchuan's expression turned ugly. He asked, "So, Zidile will become a true supreme existence from a demigod?" Galaska nodded and said, "Yes. With Zidile's ability, he will become a new supreme existence in at most a year. When that time comes, the Void Empire will have two supreme existences, you and Zidile. If they join forces with the Nephilim King and the Insect Queen, we will be in a very bad situation." Qinchuan took a deep breath and said to Galaska, "I understand. I will do my best to stop them." Void Empire. Zidile, who was dressed in a purple robe, stood on a high platform. He looked at the towering mountain in front of him with a smile on his face. "I really didn't expect this outcome to be so wonderful. I really like this outcome." Before this, Zidile had never thought that Kasisna would actually die. He had always been looking forward to Kasisna killing the arcane spirit and then returning with a portion of the arcane spirit's divine power so that they could have a contest. However, the outcome now caught Zidile off guard. He felt like a gift bag had fallen from the sky. The arcane spirit was dead, and so was Kasisna. He could perfectly inherit all the divine power and become a new supreme existence. At this moment, a cold voice suddenly sounded in Zidile's ears. "Go and bring Qinchuan back to me." Hearing this, the smile on Zidile's face slowly disappeared. He turned around and looked at the huge palace behind him. He frowned and said, "What I need to do now is to absorb all the divine power and become a supreme existence. As for Qinchuan, give me a year. After a year, I will help you bring him back." As Zidile's voice fell, the cold voice did not sound again. Zidile knew that this meant that the other party had tacitly agreed to his words. After a year, he needed to personally bring Qinchuan back and then hand him over to you. Thinking of you, Zidile's face suddenly showed a look of anticipation. He was very curious if he could be Yu's opponent after he became a supreme existence. If he could defeat you, then he did not mind killing you. However, if he was not Yu's opponent, then he did not mind continuing to be Yu's subordinate. The title of the second strongest in the universe seems pretty good. Chapter 13:21. Riastar. Galaska led his clansmen to stand on a grassland with excellent feng shui and scenery. He held Su Ling's ashes in his hands and buried them on the grassland with a sad face. Qinchuan did not attend the funeral. He stood on a mountain far away and watched the funeral from a distance. His face was cold, as if he had come out of his sad mood. Lu Zi stood beside Qinchuan and asked Qinchuan, "Why didn't you attend the funeral?" Qinchuan shook his head gently and replied, "This is the time of the void race. I can stand here and watch my predecessor be buried safely." Hearing Qinchuan's answer, Lu Zi asked again, "What are you going to do next?" Qinchuan pursed his lips and replied, "The front line needs me. I will go to the front line and finish this war as soon as possible. Then, I will prepare to counterattack the Void Empire." Counterattack the Void Empire. Hearing Qinchuan's answer, Lu Zi could not help but be surprised. Counterattacking the Void Empire was not something that could be done casually. However, no matter what decision Qinchuan made, Lu Zi would choose to support Qinchuan. Now she was a supreme existence in the Tribulation Realm, and her attainments in illusion were almost at the peak. She believed that she could help Qinchuan. Then let's counterattack the Void Empire. Then we will get rid of that bastard Yu together. Lu Zi held Qinchuan's hand tightly and said to Qinchuan, "I will always be by your side and support you." Qinchuan smiled at Lu Zi and held Lu Zi's hand, saying, Thank you for always supporting me. Lu Zi smiled and replied, I will always support you because you have never let me down. Lu Zi's support for Qin Chuan was never blind worship, nor was it because of love. It was because Qin Chuan had always been doing things that made people want to support and believe in him. The heavenly void continent was now docked near the Devil Star. As the current commander of the Void Empire, Narwei was in a very good mood. Kasisna's arrival gave Nar the hope of defeating the endless allied forces. Although Qin Chuan had advanced to the tribulation passing stage and was extremely powerful, he was just an ant in front of the demigod Kasisna. Now that the flames of war had been reignited, as long as they waited for Qin Chuan to return, they would be invincible under the leadership of this demigod. Even if there were 10 Qin Chuan, they would not be able to stop their advance. As for the only true God, Atheus, and the 2 supreme existences, Narwei did not consider them, because this was something that the Nephilim King and the Insect Queen should consider. Just as Narwei was fantasizing about how to use Kasisna's power to flatten the endless allied forces, the spy that Fadertic had once planted in the endless allied forces brought him bad news. A great battle broke out on Tiger Fong planet, and the planet turned into ashes. Su Ling is dead, and the demigod is suspected to have fallen. When he saw this information, a look of anger immediately appeared on Narwei's face. He said in a deep voice, What do you mean the demigod is suspected to have fallen? Su Ling is already dead. Who else can kill the demigod? Although Narwei said that no one could kill the demigod Kasisna, in fact, he was extremely flustered. If Kasisna really fell, it would definitely be an extremely heavy blow to the expeditionary army's morale. Send someone to investigate this matter immediately. I want to know the details of the battle. Narwei's face was ashen, and his mood could be said to be extremely bad. If Kasisna really fell, then he would have to consider whether to continue fighting the endless allied forces. Without the support of the demigod, and without the supreme existences, they could not restrain Qin Chuan. Sooner or later, they would be finished. And now, he could only keep this matter in his heart. Before he got a definite answer, he had to maintain the status quo. At the very least, he had to give the Nephilim and Zerg the confidence to continue fighting the endless allied forces. This way, when it was time for them to retreat, they would be more at ease. As for the life and death of the Nephilim and Zerg after they retreated, it was not something he needed to care about. Rumble. On the frontline battlefield, battleships crisscrossed, artillery fire roared unceasingly. All kinds of assault fleets rushed to the front line, tearing apart the enemy's line of defense one after another. Then, they were repelled by the tenacious resistance, and then rushed to kill again. On the battlefield, people were sacrificed all the time. As the main attacking party, the demon faction, in order to gain the initiative on the battlefield, had a greater advantage. However, all of their forces were thrown into the various battlefield. At one point, they had attacked the Deus cluster, and the endless allied forces were beaten back. As the temporary frontline commander, Chen Chongqing was extremely angry in the face of this situation. He was very clear that there must be some people on the battlefield who were feigning compliance, but secretly opposing and preserving their strength. They were unwilling to confront the demon faction head-on, and had been retreating. If not, they would not have been defeated so quickly. What the hell are these people thinking? Chen Chongqing was extremely angry, and asked Yao Rao, Do you know who these people are? Yao Rao nodded and replied, From the first day of the war, I have been observing the situation on the various battlefields. Now that the war is losing, the ones who are continuously retreating are the forces who disbanded the Allied forces and negotiated peace with the demon faction. They are led by the Multi-Wave clan, and they are colluding with the demon faction. Hearing Yao Rao's answer, Chen Chongqing immediately said, Capture the commander of the Multi-Wave clan, Buluan, and send him to the military court as a warning to others. With the mistake that the commander of the multi-wave clan, Boluan, had committed, it was not excessive to say that he was colluding with the enemy, and it was enough to directly behead him. However, Yao Rao had a deeper layer of concern. She slightly muttered to herself, and then said to Chen Chongqing, "Chongqing, think about it again. Once we touch Boluan, perhaps it will cause a series of chain reactions, leading to the complete collapse of the entire frontline situation." Hearing Yao Rao's words, Chen Chongqing also calmed down. Now the battle on the battlefield had not yet stopped. If he touched Boluan now, perhaps those forces who were in cahoots with Boluan would immediately give him face. At that time, for the sake of the overall situation, he might let Boluan go. In this way, his prestige would certainly suffer a heavy blow. Just when Chen Chongqing was angry in his heart, a grim voice suddenly came from outside. "Don't worry about other things, directly capture Boluan. If someone wants to cause trouble, then tell them to come find me." Hearing this voice, Chen Chongqing and Yao Rao looked towards the direction of the door. When they saw Qin Chuan walking towards them, Chen Chongqing heaved a sigh of relief. With boss here, there was nothing to worry about. Chapter 1322. Number 5 Logistics Base. In a secret room, Boluan was sitting on the main seat. His sharp eyes were looking at the people sitting on both sides. He snorted coldly and said, "What are you all afraid of? What's there to be afraid of?" Hearing Boluan's words, someone couldn't help but reply, "Chen Chongqing can't do anything to us, but what if Qin Shui comes back?" It could be said that this person spoke the thoughts of everyone. They could ignore a mere Chen Chongqing, but they couldn't ignore Qin Chuan, who had already advanced to the crossing calamity stage and became a supreme existence. If they angered Qin Chuan, it wouldn't do them any good. Boluan looked at the uneasy expressions on everyone's faces and couldn't help but sneer. "Do you think I'm not afraid of Qin Shui? But I still dare to do this. Do you know why? I also want to know why. Why don't you tell us?" Right at this moment, a tall figure appeared at a corner of the room. When everyone saw the figure that had suddenly appeared, their faces were filled with extreme terror. "Qin Chuan. No, Qin Shui. Why are you here?" When the person sitting in the corner saw Qin Chuan suddenly appear, he was so frightened that he couldn't speak coherently. His expression was as if he had seen a ghost. Qin Chuan was expressionless. He calmly looked at the panicked face in front of him and asked, "Are you afraid of me?" When the person heard Qin Chuan's words, he couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Of course, he was afraid of Qin Chuan. It must be known that the loss of the frontline war was related to them. Now that Qin Chuan had returned, if he wanted to make an example of them and establish his prestige, they would definitely bear the brunt. Qin Chuan patted the man's shoulder and said, "I remember you. You're the commander of the White Tower clan. Your name is Gaoya. Speaking of which, your White Tower clan and the human race have some relationship. Your White Tower clan was established with the help of the human race, right?" After hearing Qin Chuan's words, Gaoya couldn't help but lower his head in shame. Qin Chuan was right. The White Tower clan was established with the help of the human race. Without the help of the human race, the White Tower clan would still be a vassal of a powerful force. They would be bullied and never be able to rise again. Qin Chuan walked past Gaoya and stopped in front of the person sitting on Gaoya's left. He said, "I also remember you. You're from the Blue Clan. I think your name is Lan Ning." The man nodded and said with a complicated expression, "My name is indeed Lanning." Qin Chuan smiled and said, "It's good that I didn't remember incorrectly." While speaking, Qin Chuan had already arrived in front of the next person. In this way, Qin Chuan would point out the person's name and origin every time he arrived in front of them. He walked around the conference table in the secret room, ignoring Pulin. This made Pulin's expression extremely unsightly and his mood extremely bad. In the end, Qin Chuan walked to Gaoya's side. He looked around the room and said indifferently, I recognize every single one of you here. I also remember every word that you've said in front of me. Some of you are good people, but you were forced to appear here by bad people. There are also some who are not bad in nature, but were infected by others and became bad people. When everyone heard Qinchuan's words, their expression became very subtle. Some of them guessed the purpose of Qinchuan's words. Some of them didn't understand Qinchuan. Now, I don't care if you are good or bad. I will give you a chance. Qinchuan looked at everyone and said, during the time I wasn't at the front lines, Wave Luan must have done a lot of bad things. As long as each of you can say one bad thing that Wave Luan has done, I will forgive you. When everyone heard Qinchuan's words, their complexion changed once again. As for Qinchuan, his complexion turned completely ashen. I will speak. Gao Ye was the first to step forward. He pursed his lips and said in a low voice, Buluan once gave an order to the soldiers of the multi-wave tribe on the front lines. As long as they encounter people from the demon faction, they are to pretend to resist for a while, then abandon their supplies and immediately retreat to a safe place. This is something I saw with my own eyes. Hearing Gao Ye's words, Qinchuan smiled and said to Gao Ye, you may have become a bad person in the past, but now I will give you a chance to be a good person. Don't worry, you and the White Tower clan behind you will be very safe. When the others who hadn't spoken heard Qinchuan's words, they were all shocked. Did Qinchuan mean that if they didn't report Wave Luan, the clan behind them would also suffer a calamity? When they thought of this, someone immediately stepped forward to report Wave Luan. Marshal Qin, Wave Luan once told us that it was a very foolish decision for Commander Chen to place the human race in the most dangerous battlefield. He also said that the human race should die and that it would be better if they all died. Marshal Qin, I can testify that Wave Luan indeed said such words. He also said that Commander Chen, a mere Dongshu stage cultivator, wasn't qualified to command us in battle. Yes, Wave Luan once said that if Commander Chen appeared at the front lines, he would definitely find a way to kill him. After Gao Ye took the lead, more and more people joined in to report Wave Luan. In just a moment, the words that Wave Luan had said and the mistakes that he had made were all reported by everyone. Almost every matter, big or small, was not missed. Qinchuan looked at the people who were getting more and more agitated and raised his hand to signal them to be quiet. When the secret chamber returned to silence, Qinchuan looked at Wave Luan and asked, Wave Luan, do you have anything else to say? Wave Luan deeply looked at Qinchuan and asked, why didn't you die? Hearing Wave Luan's words, Qinchuan sighed and said, it seems that you have indeed colluded with the enemy. Otherwise, you wouldn't have said such words. Wave Luan didn't refute Qinchuan's words. At this point, there was nothing for him to say. He frankly said, that's right, I have secretly sided with the demon faction. The demon faction once said that they would send a demigod to kill you. I thought that you would definitely die. Hearing Wave Luan's words, everyone's face revealed an extremely shocked expression. They had always thought that Wave Luan was fighting passively in order to preserve his strength. They never thought that Wave Luan had actually colluded with the enemy and sided with the demon faction. Qinchuan looked at Wave Luan and replied, you are right. The demon faction did send a demigod to kill me. I survived, so that demigod is dead. Hearing Qinchuan's reply, Wave Luan's face couldn't help but reveal a touch of shock. He cried out involuntarily, how is that possible? That's a demigod. Chapter 13:23. Not only was Qinchuan extremely shocked, but the others present were also extremely shocked. Ever since Qinchuan advanced to the tribulation stage, his performance had been incomparably strong. He had killed the commander of the Void Empire's expeditionary army, Fidetic, the commander of Zerg, Guru, and severely injured the commander of the demon race, Fro. They had thought that Qinchuan's battle record was glorious enough, but they did not expect that Qinchuan had actually killed a demigod. Didn't this mean that Qinchuan's strength was already above that of a demigod? Just as everyone was incomparably shocked, Qinchuan's next sentence made everyone quietly heave a sigh of relief. In this battle, a senior that I respect very much has fallen. I am very sad and also very regretful. If this senior hadn't saved me, perhaps I would have died without a doubt, just like you said. It is also because of this that I particularly hate traitors like you who play dirty tricks behind the scenes. Qinchuan stared at Balun with extremely sharp eyes. Today, he would definitely not let Balun off. It seems that you are too lucky, and my luck is not good enough. Balun chuckled and said to Qinchuan, "This matter was done by me alone. It has nothing to do with the Multiwave tribe. If you want to kill someone, kill me." Qinchuan heard this and shook his head, saying, "It's not that I don't know some things. If not for the support of your Multiwave tribe's patriarch, you would not have done such a thing on your own." Hearing Qinchuan's words, Balun's expression suddenly changed, and he exclaimed, "You want to exterminate my Multiwave tribe?" Qinchuan shook his head again and replied, "If the tribe is not exterminated, all cultivators above the fusion stage will be executed. Within 100 years, the Multiwave tribe will not allow an overlord to appear." Qinchuan's words were understated, but a deep look of despair appeared on Balun's face. If he had known the outcome would be like this, no matter what, he would not have betrayed the endless allied army and defected to the demon faction. However, it was too late to say this now. Seeing the painful expression on Duoluan's face, the others could not help but feel sympathy for him. Although they were lucky enough to escape this calamity, in the face of Qinchuan's ruthless methods, if they had any other thoughts in the future, they would have to carefully consider whether there would be a second chance to be forgiven. Crack Balun's body inch by inch, shattering inch. Seeing Balun's silent death, the crowd, they could not help but look at Qinchuan's methods and fear. They were really afraid of Qinchuan's methods. "You all clearly know what to do." Qinchuan looked at everyone and said, "If there is nothing else, I will take my leave first." While speaking, a space portal appeared behind Qinchuan, and Qinchuan stepped into the space portal and disappeared in an instant. Outside the secret room, seeing Qinchuan coming out from the space portal, Yaorao asked, "Do you intend to let off the remaining people?" Qinchuan lightly nodded his head and replied, "They were just bewitched by Balun. I believe that with Balun's example in front of them, they won't have the guts to do any more bad things." Speaking till here, Qinchuan slightly paused and said, "Moreover, the endless allied army still needs them. If we get rid of all of them, we will lose at least 1 billion troops. This loss is not something we can bear at the present time." Hearing Qinchuan's answer, Yaorao nodded her head and said, "Since that is the case, I will continue to keep an eye on them." Qinchuan nodded his head and said to Yaorao, "Thank you for your hard work." After settling the matter of Balun, Qinchuan's original intention was to go to the battlefield to take a look at the situation. However, when he arrived at the battlefield, the war had already stopped for the time being. Demon Alliance had given up their advantage, and had withdrawn to Devil Star. And all of this was because Lu Zi and Zhou Lin had appeared on the battlefield. After Lu Zi and Zhou Lin had advanced to crossing Calamity stage, the lethality of the combination of their two great domains had become incomparably powerful. In merely a moment's time, they had strangled more than 10 million troops of Demon Alliance. With the intervention of two supreme existences of crossing Calamity stage, Demon Alliance was rapidly defeated on the battlefield, and they had spat out all the fat meat that they had eaten in their mouth. "Qinchuan, has the matter of the traitors been settled?" Lu Zi looked at Qinchuan, who had arrived at the front line, and asked about the matter of Balun with concern. Qinchuan nodded his head, and simply told Lu Zi what had happened just a moment ago. After hearing Qinchuan's narration, Lu Zi replied after thinking for a bit, "Your way of doing things is correct. Killing all of them is clearly not appropriate. Only by using both kindness and power can they once again walk on the right path. The topic of Balun ended here. Qin Chuan asked Lu Zi, "When you came over, what was the situation on the front line?" "Not very good. Some people are passively avoiding the battle, which will lead more people to passively avoid the battle. In the long run, the fighting strength of endless allied forces will be greatly reduced." Lu Zi helplessly said, "Although senior sister and I have raised the morale, but if we want to raise everyone's spirits, we still need you, the commander, to personally come forward." Qin Chuan nodded and said to Lu Zi, "I will let Changxing make arrangements for this." Just as Qin Chuan and Lu Zi were talking, the demon faction also held a high-level meeting on the Devil Planet. There were only 3 people who attended this high-level meeting. They were the current commander of the Void Empire Expeditionary Army, Neri, the commander of Zerg, Lan Ao, and the commander of the Nephilim, Ford. Ford sat at the head of the table, looking at Neri and Lan Ao with a slightly solemn gaze, and said, "As for the endless allied forces, Lu Zi and Zhou Lin have both successfully advanced to the ascension stage. They are very powerful, and their influence on the battlefield is too great. We need to solve this problem. Otherwise, we have no chance of winning." Lan Ao heard this and responded, "Then the next time the 2 of them appear, we will directly attack and kill them." Ford coldly snorted and said, "You are thinking too simply. Don't forget, Pope Saint Baudelo is here at the front line, and what about Qin Chuan? Have you considered Qin Chuan?" Ford knew Ford's experience very well, and he did not want to walk down Ford's old path. While speaking, Ford had already turned his head to look at Neri and asked, "Won't the demigod Kasisna attack Qin Chuan? What's the situation now?" Neri was silent for a moment and then replied, "The demigod Kasisna will indeed attack Qin Chuan, but I am not sure when exactly. The demigod's main purpose of descending this time is not for Qin Chuan." Neri did not know when the Nephilim and Zerg's intelligence system would learn that the demigod Kasisna had fallen. Now, he was thinking of hiding it for as long as possible. When Qin Chuan appeared, he would think of a way to evacuate this place and return to the Void Empire. This mess would be left to the Nephilim and Zerg to clean up. Chapter 13:24. The final result of the high-level meeting of the demon faction was a temporary truce. As for when they would start the war again, that would depend on the situation. However, the demon faction wanted a truce, but the endless allied army did not intend to agree. After resolving the negative impact of the Ripple Wheel incident, Chen Changxing immediately launched a counterattack against the demon faction according to Qin Chuan's idea. 2 billion troops rode 50,000 warships and headed straight for the Devil Star. The endless allied army's movements could not be hidden from the demon faction. After learning that the endless allied army had taken the initiative to attack, the demon faction immediately held another high-level meeting to discuss whether to fight or avoid as soon as possible. The Devil Star was the territory of the Nephilim race, so the Nephilim were naturally unwilling to give up. However, Zerg and the Void Empire did not intend to fight the endless allied army with the Nephilim race. The Devil Star was not their territory, so it was fine if they gave it up. The most important thing was to preserve their strength. Facing the attitude of Narain and Lan Ao, Ford was so angry that he was about to go crazy. They had agreed on an alliance, and now you want to betray the Nephilim race in order to preserve your strength? Ford, don't be angry. Do you think there is any meaning for us to stay here? Narain asked Ford earnestly. Are you willing to face Qin Chuan? The news of Qin Chuan's appearance at the front line had been reported to them by the intelligence personnel they had planted at the front line. They knew very well that if it were not for Qin Chuan's appearance at the front line, the endless allied army would not have the courage to take the initiative to attack. Ford was rendered speechless by Narway's words. Asking him to face Qin Chuan was no different from sending himself to his death. Lan Ao also sneered and said, If you are willing to face Qinchuan, then we are also willing to fight the endless allied army. Now the war is happening in the great demonic star cluster. If you, as a Nephilim, are not willing to contribute, then there is no need for us to contribute. Hearing Lan Ao's words, Ford was furious. He said in a deep voice, "In the previous war, the Nephilim race has always been the main attacker. Don't forget that it was the Nephilim race that was able to capture the Deus cluster. You are just sitting back and enjoying the fruits of our labor. Ford, don't be so agitated. Now is not the time to launch an all-out war. Once we launch an all-out war, we will naturally contribute." Lan Ao said to Ford indifferently, "None of us can solve the problem of Qinchuan now, so we can't clash with the Endless Alliance army." Ford was so angry that he laughed and said, "According to what you said, we might as well leave this universe." "No, no, no." Lan Ao shook his head and said, "When the demigod from the Void Empire attacks Qinchuan, it will be time for us to fight back. I think that demigod will not let Qinchuan live for too long." As he spoke, Lan Ao looked at Narwei and asked, "What do you think?" Although Narwei already knew that Qinchuan had fallen and could no longer attack Qinchuan, he pretended to know nothing at this time. He nodded with a smile and said, "Yes, when Lord Qinchuan kills Qinchuan, the Endless Alliance army will be at our mercy." Seeing that things had come to this, Ford no longer said anything. He snorted coldly and said, "In that case, let's retreat temporarily. Retreat to the Landry Nebula." The Landry Nebula was located behind the Devil Star and was the gateway to the Great Devil Star Cluster. Its importance was equivalent to that of the Augu Nebula of the Deus Cluster and the Io Nebula of the Celestial Cluster. The Nephilim race had launched several wars in history, but they had never withdrawn from the Devil Star. This was the first time that the Nephilim race had withdrawn from the Devil Star and retreated to the Landry Nebula. When he made this decision, Ford could already foresee that he would go down in history in the future. However, Ford had no other choice. This time, the enemy they were facing was unprecedentedly powerful. It could be said that it was second only to the human race under the Imperial command. This situation made Ford feel very helpless. It seemed that the human race was the natural nemesis of the Nephilim race. Ever since Qinchuan joined the war, the Nephilim race had not gained any advantage. Since they had decided to withdraw temporarily, the demon faction was very straightforward. Nearly 10 billion troops withdrew into the Landry Nebula and built a new line of defense at the border of the Landry Nebula, planet Dade. When the Endless Alliance army arrived at the Devil Star, it was already empty. Until the Endless Alliance army occupied the Devil Star, many people in the Endless Alliance army still could not react. They actually occupied the Devil Star so easily. After all, this was the first time in history that the Nephilim race had lost the right to rule the Devil Star. Just as the frontline soldiers were shouting and cheering, Qinchuan also understood the situation. The demon faction retreated so quickly that Qinchuan was very surprised. However, he felt that it was reasonable. After all, the demon faction had already lost 3 tribulation stage combatants. Under such circumstances, it was normal for the demon faction to retreat. Since the demon faction has retreated, we will continue to attack. The Devil Star will be taken over by the logistics team. The Vanguard army will directly advance to the Landry Nebula. Qinchuan immediately made the decision to continue to pursue the demon faction. He wanted to see how far the demon faction could retreat to. When the news of the Endless Alliance army continuing to advance to the Landry Nebula reached the demon faction, Ford was furious. The Endless Alliance army has gone too far. Qinchuan has gone too far. He is simply unreasonable. When Ford was cursing at Qinchuan, he had forgotten that when the Nephilim race attacked the Deus cluster, they did not think of going too far and unreasonable. Now they were cursing at Qinchuan. It was really unreasonable. At this time, Lan Ao also felt that things were not going well. They could persuade Ford to give up the Devil Star, but it would be unreasonable to ask Ford to give up the Landry Nebula again. Moreover, what made Lon Ao feel even more strange was that the demigod of the Void Empire, Kasisna, had not been heard from except for one appearance. This made Lon Ao feel a little puzzled. When he asked Nar also did not know anything. Lon Ao instinctively felt that Nar was not telling the truth. However, he also did not expect that Kasisna, a demigod, was dead. This time, we can't retreat anymore. Lon Ao looked at Nar and asked, "What is your demigod doing? Why hasn't he made a move yet? Could it be that Chinchuan's current target is not obvious enough?" Hearing Lon Ao's words, Nar snorted coldly and said, "What the demigod wants to do is not something I can ask." Facing Nar's attitude, Lon Ao frowned. Ford also felt that it was strange. It had been more than half a month, and the demigod had not made any move. This was too strange. Chapter 13:25. On the west side of the celestial cluster, there were 29 nebulae of various sizes distributed. These nebulae belonged to a total of 204 small and medium-sized forces. Powerful forces such as the Bronze Race and the Naga Race could occupy more than half of the nebulae. Weak forces occupied 1 to 2 planets, or even 3 to 4 planets. These large and small forces were intertwined with each other and had a deep relationship with each other. Therefore, there were almost no wars here. Even if there were conflicts, they were controlled within a small area. This place was called the Land of the Silver Ring because it was surrounded by a silver ring-like asteroid belt. In addition to bordering the Tian people, the Land of the Silver Ring was not bordered by other star clusters. It was almost half surrounded by the dark universe. Therefore, the Land of the Silver Ring could be said to be extremely safe. In the past, the people of the Land of the Silver Ring had always thought so. But today, the demon army passing through the dark universe caught the Land of the Silver Ring off guard. 2 days ago, a demon army was advancing aimlessly in the dark universe. Now, this demon army had been deep in the dark universe for more than a year. In this year, more than 80% of their supplies had been consumed. At the same time, they had lost their sense of direction and could not find the way forward. Although they knew where the way back was, the current situation did not allow them to retreat. In this case, the emotions of all the demon army had almost reached the verge of collapse. Even Kisla, the commander, could not hold on any longer. They did not have many supplies left. If they could not find a way out in the next half a month, then they might face the dilemma of losing the power of their battleships and having to find a nearby planet to dock at. However, there was a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel. Just as Kisla was about to lose all hope, the scout at the forefront suddenly brought back exciting news. They had met the people of the Orange Race in the Dark Universe. This meant that they might not be far from the way out. The excited Kisla directly took action and captured all the Orange Race people on the ship. Facing the powerful Kisla, the Orange Race people could not bear the pressure and quickly explained everything to Kisla. It turned out that this group of Orange Race people had entered the Dark Universe to seek opportunities. Before this, the Orange Race was also a member of the Endless Allied Forces. However, at the beginning of the Endless Allied Forces, the weak Orange Race chose to withdraw from the Endless Allied Forces due to the fear of war. Therefore, the Tian people cut off all business contacts with the Orange Race. Even some small and medium-sized forces around the Orange Race no longer contacted them. This situation could be said to have forced the Orange Race into a desperate situation. Helplessly, the Orange Race could only pin their hopes on the Dark Universe, hoping that there would be new gains and discoveries in the Dark Universe that could help the development of the Orange Race. This was the second day the Orange Clan went deep into the Dark Universe. No one expected to meet the Nephilim so coincidentally. At this time, the direction of the demon army happened to be slightly parallel to the Land of the Silver Ring. In fact, they were less than 2 million miles away from the Land of the Silver Ring. However, if they had not met the Orange Race people, perhaps they would never have known about this matter, and would never have been able to reach the land of the Silver Ring. This is luck. Kisla could not help but sigh at this time. If the Orange Race had not withdrawn from the endless allied forces and been forced to a dead end by Qin Chuan and the Tian people, then the Orange Race would not have thought of seeking development in the Dark Universe. In this way, they would not have met the Orange Race and perhaps would never have been able to reach the land of the Silver Ring 2 million miles away. In Kisla's opinion, all this was fate. Take us to the land of the Silver Ring. For the sake of safety, Kisla decided to let the Orange Race people lead the way and promised to let them go. If the Orange Race people were unwilling to lead the way, then they would definitely die. Facing the threat of death, the people of the Orange clan chose to lead the way. Their previous encounters had already made them lose any sense of belonging to the Silver Ring land. They even faintly hoped that the demon race could capture the Silver Ring land and let those who had mocked and ridiculed them all die under the demon race's weapons. If the demon race's army needed them, they could even lead the way and help the demon race's army attack the divine race. In this way, under the leadership of the Orange Race people, the demon army smoothly entered the land of the Silver Ring and came to the area where the 3 planets occupied by the Orange Race were located. Because the other forces had drawn a clear line with the Orange Race, when the demon army entered the territory of the Orange Race, no one discovered this situation. When the Orange Race people led the demon army back to the Orange Race, everyone in the Orange Race was shocked. No one expected that the exploration team they sent out would bring back a demon army from the Dark Universe. Now that the demon army was at their doorstep, even if the Orange Race was unwilling to cooperate with the demon army, it was impossible. With the help of the Orange clan, it only took the Nephilim army 2 days to recharge their battleship. At the same time, they also replenished their supplies. In order to satisfy the needs of the Nephilim army, the Orange clan went all out. This made the already poor Orange clan even worse. Kisla kept his promise and did not kill the Orange Race people who led the way, but the rest of the Orange Race people died in the hands of the demon army. The blood of the Orange Race people dyed their territory red, which also reinvigorated the demon army and led the demon army to attack the Yellow Race who was located around the Orange Race. 1 day later, the Yellow Race was destroyed. At the same time, the news of the demon army passing through the Dark Universe and killing their way into the land of the Silver Ring spread to the ears of the various forces. The people in the land of the Silver Ring suddenly panicked, and everyone fled like crazy. When the news reached the Devil Star and reached Qin Chuan, the vanguard of the endless allied army had already rushed to the vicinity of the Landry Nebula. After learning this news, Qin Chuan immediately ordered the vanguard to retreat because there were many forces from the land of the Silver Ring in the vanguard. If he still attacked the Landry Nebula when the land of the Silver Ring was in chaos, it might lead to a mutiny. Qin Chuan, the Tian people have already reacted. They have begun to gather the army and prepare to enter the land of the Silver Ring to suppress the demon army. I believe the land of the Silver Ring will soon be settled down. Lu Zi comforted Qin Chuan, hoping that Qin Chuan would not be too anxious. No matter what, as the commander, he could not panic. Chapter 1326. Just as Qin Chuan had expected, when the news of the Nephilim army attacking the Silver Ring reached the vanguard army, the entire vanguard army was in a mess. In Qian Feng's army, at least half of them came from the Silver Ring. They had relatives and friends in the Silver Ring, and they even had their own homes. Now that they were facing the threat of the Nephilim army, how could they be at ease? In order to prevent the situation from becoming more chaotic, Qin Chuan quickly revealed that the Tian people had already gathered an army and were preparing to go to the Silver Ring to pacify the war. After hearing this news, the vanguard army was finally relieved. Now that the information about the Nephilim army had been gathered, it was found that the Nephilim army only had 100 million soldiers, and most of their battleships had been destroyed. If the silver ring had not been so weak, the Nephilim army would not have been able to run rampant in the silver ring. As long as the Tian people attacked, they would definitely be able to eliminate the Nephilim army. However, when it rains, it pours. Just as the Tian people were about to enter the silver ring to pacify the Nephilim army, the Tian people received the news that Zerg had captured the Nephilim army, and the mysterious tribulation stage expert guarding the Nephilim army had died in battle. When the news reached Stansos, Zerg's army had already marched straight into the silver ring from the direction of the Nephilim army. The Tian people immediately made a decision to transfer the army that was originally going to the silver ring to the Nephilim army to resist Zerg's invasion in the Iki Nebula. As for the matter of rescuing the silver ring, it would have to wait until the second wave of the Nephilim army was assembled. When the news reached the front line of the Deus cluster, a mutiny immediately broke out in the Endless Allied army. Qin Chuan had to step in personally to suppress this matter. However, suppressing it by force would not solve the problem. He had to find a way to stabilize the army's morale. Otherwise, when the demon faction's counterattack arrived, they would definitely not be able to withstand it. At this time, in Qin Chuan's residence, everyone was gathered together to discuss how to solve the problem at hand. Chen Chongqing frowned as he looked at Qin Chuan and said, "Right now, the emotions of the soldiers on the front lines are extremely unstable, especially those whose families have already been wiped out. The 50 million Huang clan soldiers are collectively protesting, demanding that we lead the army to the silver hoop to avenge their dead relatives and friends." Waiting until Chen Chongqing's voice fell, Yaorao added, "In these 2 days, I have already caught more than 1,000 spies of demon faction. They are spreading rumors in the army, causing panic and disorder in the army." Tian San helplessly sighed and said, "I have already asked about the matter of the celestial cluster. It is not that we Tian people are unwilling to support the silver hoop, but it is because Tianxiong died in battle." The Tianxiong mentioned by Tian San was the mysterious tribulation stage expert of the Tian people. Tianxiong was the younger brother of the Sky Emperor. He had always been the hidden strength of the Tian people and rarely appeared in public. Under the situation where Tianxiong was overseeing the Deus cluster, the Tian people from top to bottom thought that it would be very difficult for Zerg to attack the Deus cluster. However, Zerg actually killed Tianxiong. This was something that no one had expected. Some people speculated that Tianxiong died because the Saint Emperor Zerg personally took action. Otherwise, there was no reason for a dignified tribulation stage expert to die so quietly. However, even if the Saint Emperor personally took action, Tianxiong's death was a little too simple. There were many suspicious points in this matter that still needed to be investigated. However, before investigating this matter, the situation in the celestial cluster must be stabilized first. They could not abandon the celestial cluster when the Deus cluster had just been recovered. Hearing Tian San's words, Pope Saint Baudelu said, "We can give up on the Devil's Star and return to the Deus cluster to continue defending. Then, we can transfer some of our forces back to the celestial cluster to help the celestial cluster repel Zerg." Luzi shook her head and said, "No, it will take at least 4 months from here to the beloved wife nebula of the celestial cluster, even at the fastest speed. Moreover, no one knows what the situation will be like after 4 months. We will lose sight of one thing and lose sight of the other." Luzi's words were very reasonable. It would take too long to return to the celestial cluster from here. By the time they returned, it would be too late. Then we can't just do nothing. Zhou looked at Qin Chuan and then at Chen Chongqing and said, "You two have the best ideas. You two come up with an idea." Qin Chuan looked at Chen Chongqing and asked, "Chongqing, what do you think?" Chen Chongqing pondered for a moment and then said to Qin Chuan, "Boss, I think it's impossible for us to return to the celestial cluster and go to the Iki Nebula to support the Tian people. There's not enough time. However, we can let you lead a group of high-end combat forces to the Iki Nebula to support the Tian people. With your space travel ability, it shouldn't take long to reach the Iki Nebula. Hearing Chen Chongqing's words, everyone looked at Qin Chuan. Letting Qin Chuan go to the Iki Nebula to support the Tian people was indeed the best idea they could think of at the moment. Facing everyone's gaze, Qin Chuan pondered for a moment and said, "If we use space travel, it will take about 10 days to reach the Iki Nebula. If we don't stop, it will be even faster." Speaking of this, Qin Chuan looked around and asked, "But how many people should I bring?" Hearing this question from Qin Chuan, everyone couldn't help but fall into deep thought. No matter how many overlords of the body integration stage were brought to the Iki Nebula, it wouldn't have much of an impact on the war. Therefore, Qin Chuan wanted to bring the supreme existences of the transcending tribulation stage. Currently, there were 4 supreme existences of the transcending tribulation stage on the demonic star. They were Pope Saint Bartolo, Lu Zi, Zhou Lin, and Qin Chuan. Lu Zi and Zhou Lin were more powerful when they worked together, so it was impossible for them to take one person with them. However, if Zhou Lin and Lu Zi were to take both of them, the combat strength of the demonic star would be slightly weaker. "Senior sister and I will stay. You take Pope Saint Bartolo to support the Iki Nebula," Lu Zi said to Qin Chuan. "Also, you can go to the Dark Cosmos. Thelon and Sharmilla are on the Millstone continent. They might have already reached the transcending tribulation stage." Previously, when Zhou Lin and Lu Zi went to the Millstone continent with Prince Chiron, Thelon and Sharmilla also went with them. At that time, the 2 of them successfully reached the transcending tribulation stage. Prince Chiron also successfully reached the transcending tribulation stage. Thelon and Sharmilla were still a bit away from reaching the transcending tribulation stage. Now, it was probably time for them to reach the transcending tribulation stage. Now that the celestial cluster was in danger, it was time for them to contribute. Chapter 13:27. While the outside world was in an uproar due to the attack on the Silver Ring and the fall of the Chaos Rock Star, Thelon and Sharmilla were undergoing their final training under Kalen's care. Thelon and Sharmilla's energy had fused to a very high degree and were only a little bit away from triggering the immortal tribulation. Kylon looked at Thelon and Sharmilla, who were thousands of miles away from each other. He was full of expectations. When Thelon and Sharmilla reached the transcending tribulation stage, the Tian people would have 3 more transcending tribulation stage experts. This would definitely be a great boost for the Tian people. Just as Kylon was thinking about this, a space portal suddenly appeared behind him. Kylon was very alert and turned around. When he saw Qin Chuan walking out of the space portal, Kylon let out a sigh of relief. "Why are you here?" Kylon looked at Qin Chuan, who suddenly appeared, and smiled. "Speaking of which, I still have to thank you. Although I can use the Heavenly Lake to reach the transcending tribulation stage, Thelon and Sharmilla didn't have this opportunity. Now, the 3 of us can reach the transcending tribulation stage." Hearing Kalen's words, Qin Chuan couldn't help but look at the Millstone continent and asked, "How much more time do Thelon and Sharmilla need?" Because of Kylon and the other 2, Qin Chuan didn't take Pope Bartolo with him. In Qin Chuan's opinion, if the 3 of them could successfully reach the transcending tribulation stage, then this force would be enough to support the Iki Nebula. Kylon thought for a moment and answered Qin Chuan's question. They need at most 2 or 3 days to try to trigger the immortal tribulation and reach the transcending tribulation stage. Hearing Kalen's answer, Qin Chuan shook his head and said, "No, I can only give them 1 day at most." Kalen's expression changed slightly and asked, "Did something happen outside?" Qin Chuan nodded and answered, "Zerg broke through the Chaos Rock Star and Tianxiong died in battle." Hearing Qin Chuan's answer, Kalen's expression changed and he cried out involuntarily, "Uncle Tianxiong died? How is that possible?" "Nothing is impossible, Yizichin said. Qin Chuan looked at Kylon and said, Zerg has begun to attack the Iki Nebula. I'm going to reinforce the Iki Nebula. But if Thelon and Sharmillas can't reach the transcending tribulation stage, then there's no need to bring them to the transcending tribulation stage. If Thelon and Sharmilla could reach the transcending tribulation stage, then bringing them to the Iki Nebula would be of some use. If they couldn't reach the transcending tribulation stage, then they would only be unity stage overlords. Whether they went to the Iki Nebula or not wouldn't affect the overall situation. Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Kylon wanted to tell Thelon and Sharmilla the news, but he was worried that Thelon and Sharmilla's impatience would affect the progress. Qin Chuan saw Kalen's dilemma and said, Let's just go with the flow. The immortal tribulation isn't like other lightning tribulations. It's still too dangerous. Kylon nodded and said, That's the only way. In fact, Kylon was also a little worried. After all, the immortal tribulation was too terrifying. If Thelon and Sharmilla's mentality were affected because of this matter, and they died under the immortal tribulation, then as their big brother, he would definitely feel guilty and blame himself for the rest of his life. Qin Chuan's arrival wasn't noticed by Thelon and Sharmilla. At this time, Thelon and Sharmilla were completely immersed in cultivation. They constantly sharpened their strength, and wanted to reach the level of fusion as soon as possible. Qin Chuan and Kylon stood in the void and watched Thelon and Sharmilla's situation. If Thelon and Sharmilla couldn't trigger the immortal tribulation and reach the transcending tribulation stage in one day, then the two of them would leave. Time passed little by little. After more than half a day, Thelon suddenly looked up to the sky and roared. Immediately, the tribulation cloud rolled over. On the other side, under the influence of Thelon, Sharmilla also let out a cry and triggered the immortal tribulation. Seeing this scene, Kylon didn't feel relaxed at all. On the contrary, he was even more worried because it wasn't difficult to trigger the immortal tribulation with the help of the Millstone Continent. The difficult thing was how to pass the immortal tribulation. Even though Qin Chuan controlled the power of the Law of Thunder, in the face of the extremely dangerous immortal tribulation, Qin Chuan didn't dare to rashly intervene. Everything depends on their own fate. After passing the immortal tribulation and reaching the transcending tribulation stage, if they failed, they would die. As the third prince and the 12th princess of the Tian people, Thelon and Sharmilla's talent was unquestionable. Therefore, they successfully passed the immortal tribulation. Thelon had 6 immortal tribulations, while Sharmilla had 7. When Thelon and Sharmilla successfully passed the immortal tribulation and reached the transcending tribulation stage, they immediately came to Kylon excitedly to report the good news. Then, they were very surprised to see Qin Chuan. Before Thelon and Sharmilla could greet Qin Chuan had already opened a space portal and said to them, Let's go. We'll talk on the way. Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Thelon and Sharmilla were a little surprised, but they didn't ask much. They directly followed Qin Chuan into the space portal. On the way to the Iki Nebula, Thelon and Sharmilla finally learned from Qin Chuan what had happened during their cultivation. Tianxiong's death in battle was especially hard for Thelon and Sharmilla to accept. They had already experienced the pain of losing Heavenly King Oliver. They didn't expect to experience the pain of losing their uncle, Tianxiong. Damn that Zerg! Thelon's eyes were red. He gritted his teeth and said, I must kill them all and tear them to pieces. Qin Chuan glanced at Thelon, who was obviously not in a good state, and said to Thelon, Don't get too excited. Zerg's situation is a little complicated. Even if you want to take revenge, you must follow the plan. Don't act rashly. Thelon gritted his teeth and said, I know. Looking at Thelon's expression, Qin Chuan knew that Thelon didn't take his advice to heart. He also understood Thelon. No matter who encountered such a situation, they would probably go crazy with anger. Sharmilla, look after Thelon. Don't let him die alone. Chuan had no choice but to transmit his voice to Sharmila, hoping that Sharmila could persuade Thelon. Hearing Chuan's transmission, Sharmila didn't respond to Chuan. Obviously, Sharmila didn't say anything, but deep in her heart, she also felt incomparable pain and anger. This gave Chuan a headache. Before Thelon and Sharmila reached the tribulation stage, they might be able to endure it. Now that they had reached the tribulation stage, it was time for their confidence to soar. They might not be able to endure it. Chapter 1328. Celestial Cluster, Iki Nebula. When news of Tianxiong's death reached Stansos, the celestial ruler personally led his troops to the Iki Nebula and took command of the front lines, temporarily blocking the attack of Zerg's army. However, this was only temporary. Although the celestial ruler held a high position among the Tian people, his strength was not much stronger than Tianxiong's. This meant that the mysterious powerhouse who had killed Tianxiong without anyone noticing could easily kill him as well. This time, the celestial ruler was accompanied to the Iki Nebula by Tian Yi, Tian Si, Tian Wu, Tian Lu, and Tian Qi of the Elders' Council. Elder Tian Er, who did not come, was in charge of Stansos. Elder Tian Ba was in charge of the second wave of troops, and Elder Tianjiu was in charge of coordinating the various forces. At this time, the celestial ruler and many elders were gathered together on planet Iki of the Iki Nebula. Everyone's expression was very unpleasant. The war had broken out too suddenly. Planet Iki had fallen, hundreds of millions of troops had been wiped out, and Zerg had marched straight in. They had no time to care about the Silver Ring. Now, the demon race was wreaking havoc in the Silver Ring. If they could not solve the problem caused by Zerg's invasion in time, the situation would become very unfavorable for them. Have you found out the cause of Tianxiong's death? All the elders remained silent in the face of the Heaven Emperor's question. None of them answered because the investigation had yet to reach a conclusion. Apart from knowing that Tianxiong was dead, they had no idea who had killed him or how he had died. The celestial ruler looked around and saw everyone's expression. When he saw that no one answered him, he snorted coldly and said, "Don't tell me you didn't find any clues at all?" Tianxiong was in the crossing calamity stage, not the form synthesis stage. How could he have died without any reason? In the end, it was Tian Yi who sighed and said, "We can't find any evidence. However, based on Zerg's situation, the person who killed him should be the Holy Emperor." The celestial ruler's face darkened when he heard Tian Yi's words. He said in a deep voice, "So, he called himself the Holy Emperor. Has he really become a supreme existence?" This time, Tian Yi could not answer the celestial ruler's question. If the Holy Emperor had really become a supreme existence, then it was a big deal. No one dared to make wild guesses before they had confirmation. The celestial ruler's arrival. Chuan's speed. Chuan's space travel technique. He's speed. In's SS. Ins. It's Qian. SSS says. A. In SS. Az's speed space. Was S. Not long ago, Chuan had killed several supreme existences at the tribulation stage. He also killed the demigod Kasisna. His battle prowess could be said to be comparable to a demigod's. With Chuan's support, they felt a lot more at ease. Also, there's another piece of news. Chuan will go to the Millstone continent. He'll bring Kylon, Thelon, and Sharmila over. However, they'll have to reach the tribulation stage first. Tianxi looked at everyone and said, "If Kylon and the others can come back, then we'll have 4 more tribulation stage experts. We'll definitely be able to fight back against Zerg." Hearing Tianxi's words, everyone felt a little emotional. The new generation was replacing the old. They were still in the unity stage, but Kylon and the others had already reached the tribulation stage. When Qin Chuan leaves the Dark Universe, he'll contact us again. At that time, we'll know the situation of Kylon and the others. Very good. This is indeed good news. The Sky Emperor was a little relieved. The gloominess caused by Tianxiong's death had also been dispelled a little. Rocky Star. Originally, Messy Rock Star was a chaotic place with no one managing it. Not long ago, Celestial Xiong had graced Messy Rock Star with his presence, causing the outlaws of Messy Rock Star to settle down for a period of time. Now that Celestial Xiong had fallen and the insectoids had taken over Messy Rock Star, the inhabitants of Messy Rock Star were all captured by the insectoids and sent to a large planet filled with caves as food. Whenever someone was sent to one of these caves, there would always be miserable screams and low chewing and swallowing sounds coming from the cave. The Holy Emperor stood in the distance and calmly looked at the planet full of caves. He asked the person beside him, "Is the devil bug full?" Hearing the Holy Emperor's question, Blackface immediately replied, "The devil bug is almost full. Once it's full, we can let it continue to fight." The Holy Emperor nodded and said to Blackface, "Let it be full as soon as possible and then throw it into the Iki Nebula. If we delay too long, the Tian people might notice our intentions." "Yes, I understand." Blackface immediately began to arrange the feeding of the devil bug. He compressed the time to meet the Holy Emperor's request. "Holy Emperor." A tall figure slowly walked over and handed a report to the Holy Emperor. She said, "This is a report from Lan Ao from the Great Demonic Star Cluster. Qin Chuan has left the Endless Allied Army and is on his way to the Iki Nebula." The Holy Emperor took the report and glanced at it. He then turned it to dust and said to the tall figure beside him, "Huizhong, do you think Qin Chuan will be a threat to us?" Huizhong smiled and said, "You must be joking. With you here, even if a few more Qin Chuan come, they won't be a threat to us. But now is not the time for me to take the initiative." The Holy Emperor waved his hand and said to Huizhong, "Tell this news to that person and let that person take action. He has been interested in Qin Chuan for a long time." Huizhong nodded and said, "I understand. I will do as you say." Not long after Huizhong left, a sharp howl suddenly erupted from the planet full of caves. The devil bug was finally full after eating a large number of residents of the chaotic rock star. When a huge interstellar teleportation array lit up below the planet suddenly became blurry. A moment later, it was teleported away. If Qin Chuan saw this scene, he would be shocked. Because even with his attainments in the law of space, he can't teleport an entire planet. The Holy Emperor looked in the direction where the planet disappeared. He narrowed his eyes and said softly, "Qin Chuan, after you die, my only opponent will be you." Chapter 1329. After Qin Chuan and the other three left the Dark Universe, they immediately contacted the Tian people and told them the good news that the three of them had successfully reached the Ascension stage, which boosted the low morale of the Tian people. Now, the three of them finally understood what had happened recently through their own channels. For the Endless Allied Army, it was both good news and bad news. The good news was that Qin Chuan had cooperated with the Arcane Church to kill the demigod Kasisna of the Void Empire. Then, the Endless Allied Army gained a great advantage in the front line and sounded the horn of a counterattack. If it were not for the sudden problems in the land of Silver Ring and Rocky Star, the Endless Allied Army might have already launched an attack on the Landry Nebula. The bad news was that the Demon Faction's Nephilim army had launched a surprise attack on the land of Silver Ring through the Dark Universe. At the same time, Zerg had launched an attack on Rocky Star, killing the Tian people's Ascension Stage powerhouse, Tianxiong. Zerg had marched straight into the Iki Nebula. Qin Chuan and the others could not imagine that so many things had happened in the 2 months they had been away. When Qin Chuan and the others entered the celestial cluster and passed through the Io Nebula, Qin Chuan, who was opening a dimensional portal, suddenly stopped and turned his head to look to the north. The three of them noticed Qinchuan's movement and turned their heads to look to the north. At first, they were wondering what Qinchuan was looking at. Soon, a tall blue figure appeared within their range of perception. When they sensed the existence of the blue figure, Qinchuan was a little surprised and asked Qinchuan, "You've already sensed this person's existence?" Qinchuan nodded and said, "You guys go first. He's here to find me." Hearing Qinchuan's words, Qinchuan hesitated and said, "The four of us will attack together. Let's end this quickly." Qinchuan shook his head and said to Qinchuan, "He's a demigod. There's no point in you guys staying here. Hurry back to the Iki Nebula. You guys go first. I'll catch up with you after I've dealt with him." Thelon frowned and said, "A demigod? Why is there another demigod?" Before this, they had never heard of such a demigod in the universe. "Let's go." Seeing that the blue figure was getting closer and closer, Qinchuan had no time to explain too much to them. "Let's go first." Qinchuan was a demigod, a demigod, a demigod, a demigod, a demigod, 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 demigod. This feeling dealt a blow to Sharmila's self-confidence. Originally, she thought that after advancing to the transcending calamity stage, she had become one of the top existences in this universe. If the ultimate existences did not appear, she would be one of the strongest. However, reality slapped her hard in the face. This made her realize that she was still not strong enough. Qinchuan was helpless and said to Qinchuan, "We'll keep going in this direction and wait for you to catch up with us." Qinchuan nodded, his eyes fixed on the approaching blue figure. After Qinchuan and the other two left, the blue figure finally came to a place less than a kilometer away from Qinchuan. He slowly stopped and said to Qinchuan in a low voice, "I thought you'd let them stay and help you deal with me." Hearing the blue figure's words, Qinchuan took a deep look at him and asked, "Have we met somewhere before?" "Yes, we have." The blue figure looked at Qinchuan and said indifferently, "When you reached the body fusion stage, I was watching you from above." "Sure enough, you were. I remember your eyes." Qinchuan took a deep breath, and his expression gradually became somewhat solemn. The moment this blue figure appeared within his range of perception, he felt that it was extremely familiar. At this moment, when he heard the blue figure's words, he immediately recalled the face that had appeared in the tribulation clouds during the body fusion lightning tribulation. At that time, Qinchuan had already realized that he and the face in the tribulation clouds would meet one day, and there would be a battle. However, he hadn't expected that this day would come at such a special time, and it would actually come at such a special time. "You're from Zerg's side?" Qinchuan looked at the blue figure curiously, because the time the blue figure appeared was really special. "There's no need to answer this question." The blue figure looked at Qinchuan and said, "I'm pressed for time, so let's start the fight." "Then tell me where you're from before the fight." Qinchuan suddenly grinned, "Otherwise I'll die without knowing why." The blue figure looked at Qinchuan deeply and said, "Thunder Clan, Rengar." Sizzle. Rumble. In the distance, Chiron and the other two who were hurrying on their way heard the violent sound behind them and subconsciously turned their heads to look behind them. When they saw the blue lightning that occupied the entire sky, they were shocked and couldn't say a word. If such violent power hit them, it would be enough to melt them in an instant. Is Qinchuan fighting with that person? This momentum is too shocking. Thelon was stunned. Could it be that Qinchuan has also become a demigod? I'm not sure, but Qinchuan is definitely stronger than us. Chiron looked at the situation behind him again, then turned to Thelon and Sharmila and said, "Let's go." Thelon and Sharmila took one last deep look at the lightning behind them, then turned and continued in the direction of the Iki Nebula. Now they could only pray for Qinchuan. In the lightning, Qinchuan frowned and looked at the power of thunder that was constantly flowing around him. His expression was very serious. "This Rengar is indeed the same as me. We both control the power of the law of thunder, but the power of the law of thunder he controls is obviously stronger than mine. Just as Qin Chuan was thinking about this, Rengar suddenly appeared behind him and attacked Qin Chuan's back with a ball of lightning in his hand. At the critical moment, a black vortex suddenly appeared behind Qin Chuan and swallowed all the lightning that was attacking him. At the same time, Qin Chuan turned around to counterattack, but Rengar's figure suddenly disappeared and then appeared behind Qin Chuan again. During this time, he did not even pause for 0.1 seconds. Bang! This time, Rengar's attack landed squarely on Qin Chuan's back. Qin Chuan's figure was sent flying, but Rengar's figure suddenly appeared in front of Qin Chuan. He raised his hand and violently punched Qin Chuan's abdomen. Bang! 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 In just a short moment, Qin Chuan was attacked hundreds of times. Chapter 1330. Rengar fiercely punched Qin Chuan in the chest, sending him flying. At the same time, balls of lightning shot towards Qin Chuan from all directions, exploding the moment they hit Qin Chuan. Almost instantly, they severely injured Qin Chuan. Rengar stopped attacking. He looked at Qin Chuan, who was already covered in blood, and said indifferently, "Any last words?" Hearing Rengar's words, Qin Chuan slowly raised his head, grinned, and asked, "Do you people like to talk so much nonsense before killing people? You don't really think that you have completely controlled the situation, do you?" In the face of Qin Chuan's ridicule, Rengar was very calm, because he never cared about people who were about to die. He said to Qin Chuan indifferently, "This is the thunder domain I created with the power of thunder. After integrating the law of thunder, no one in this domain can be my opponent. From the nascent soul stage until now, there are too many people who have died in my domain. You are not the first, and you will not be the last." Qin Chuan sighed and said, "So this is the power of your domain. To be honest, I haven't been able to tinker with my own domain since the nascent soul stage because I have learned too many things. There is no way for me to specialize in one domain like you people." When he spoke up to hear, Qin Chuan suddenly chuckled and said, "But you did remind me. Since this domain is constructed from the laws of lightning, then as one of the controllers of the laws of lightning, can I control this lightning domain as well?" Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Rengar sneered disdainfully and said, "You think too simply." Before Rengar could finish his words, he suddenly stopped. This was because under his gaze, Qin Chuan's figure was actually disappearing bit by bit. In the next moment, Qin Chuan's figure suddenly appeared behind Rengar. In his palm, Leifa shone with a dazzling light and hit Rengar's back, waking up Rengar, who was in shock. Bang! Rengar subconsciously turned around to counterattack Qin Chuan, but Qin Chuan's figure retreated like a ghost and pulled away in an instant. "How can you control the thunder domain I created?" Rengar stared at Qin Chuan, his face full of disbelief. He had always been used to controlling everything. Finally, for the first time, he panicked. Facing the panicked Rengar, Qin Chuan smiled and asked, "You seem very surprised?" Rengar was of course surprised and even furious. For a long time, Rengar, the thunder domain had been like his home, private domain. But now, Qin Chuan had directly occupied his home, his private domain. "Answer my question." Rengar was furious. He tried to control the thunder domain and cut off Qin Chuan's control of the thunder domain, but he couldn't do it. Right now, Qin Chuan was like his half-brother, living in his house. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't chase him away. The angrier Rengar was, the more relaxed Qin Chuan was, and the more he felt that his decision was very wise. When Rengar used the power of the thunder domain to beat him up, he wondered if he could use the power of the thunder law to turn the tables. Although he failed in his initial attempt, when he used the power of the void, he succeeded easily as expected. If he couldn't win, he would join. It was such a simple principle. Qin Chuan's figure disappeared again. When Rengar saw this, he immediately hid his figure in the Thunder Domain. At this time, Qin Chuan and Rengar both used the power of the Thunder Domain to block each other's perception. It was like playing hide and seek silently. Time passed little by little. Rengar, who had always been extremely irritable, gradually couldn't hold back the irritation in his heart. He wanted to take the initiative to attack, but according to his judgment, Qin Chuan could be hiding in two places. He only had one chance to attack. If he made a wrong choice, he might immediately be counterattacked by Qin Chuan. Rengar had always been a person who would rather make mistakes than do nothing. So, at this moment, he chose to take the initiative to attack. Rengar was like a lion on the hunt. He quickly attacked. He crossed 1,000 miles in one step and suddenly appeared in a point in the Thunder Domain. He held a huge blue war hammer and smashed it at that point. Bang! Under the bombardment of the blue war hammer, the Thunder Domain was immediately penetrated. The terrifying power swept in all directions. Kacha! Kacha! Under the power of this hammer, the Thunder Domain was actually shattered. This is your demigod power, right? Behind Rengar, Qin Chuan looked at the war hammer in Rengar's hand that was formed by the demigod power. His expression was slightly subtle. Rengar's attack just now almost hit him. If he was hit by this hammer, even if he didn't die, he would be crippled. Rengar slowly turned around. He looked at Qin Chuan with a malicious gaze and said coldly, "This is the first time my Thunder Domain has been shattered by someone. And the person who shattered my Thunder Domain is actually me." Hearing Rengar's words, Qin Chuan smiled and said, "This is probably the legendary I hammer myself." Boom! The war hammer in Rengar's hand fiercely bombarded the place where Qin Chuan was standing, directly shattering that space into pieces. A strong suction force erupted from the black hole, but it couldn't move Rengar at all. Long before Rengar attacked, Qin Chuan had already sensed that something was wrong and dodged. He looked at the grumpy Rengar and said with a smile, "Don't be so agitated. Can't we have a good chat?" However, the calmer Qin Chuan was, the angrier Rengar was. Since his rise, he had always been an extremely powerful existence. No matter who his opponent was, he had never lost, let alone been looked down upon like this. So, today, he must hammer Qin Chuan to death. Kill! Rengar roared and brazenly threw the war hammer in his hand at Qin Chuan. When Qin Chuan dodged again, Rengar instantly approached Qin Chuan like a bolt of lightning. An extremely terrifying thunderous force suddenly erupted from his body and hit Qin Chuan, causing the universe to tremble. This time, Rengar used more than 50% of his demigod power. He believed that even if Qin Chuan's body was made of the strongest metal in the universe, it would still be shattered. However, when he saw Qin Chuan's figure turn into a bolt of lightning and disappear under the bombardment of the demigod power, Rengar's expression suddenly froze. "No way, no way. Don't tell me you didn't see that it was just my doppelganger?" Qin Chuan's slightly annoying voice sounded behind Rengar, causing Rengar to lose control of his emotions on the spot. Chapter 1331. Now Rengar regretted it very much. He didn't know why he gave Qin Chuan time to say his last words. If he had directly killed Qin Chuan, then he wouldn't have to suffer this kind of torture. The happier Qin Chuan was, the more indifferent he was, the more the anger in Rengar's heart surged like an active volcano, ready to erupt at any time. Only by killing Qin Chuan and tearing Qin Chuan into pieces could Rengar's anger be slightly alleviated. On the other side, Qin Chuan seemed to be able to see Rengar's body constantly accumulating and suppressing the flames of anger. For him, the angrier Rengar was, the more advantageous the situation was for him. He was deliberately provoking Rengar. He wanted Rengar to fall into a rage and lose his mind. Only then would he have a chance to defeat Rengar. If he were to face a clear-headed and rational Rengar, his chances of winning would be less than 30%. But if he were to face a Rengar who had lost his mind, his chances of winning would increase by at least 20%. Therefore, he had to make Rengar even angrier. "Hey, big guy, I have some understanding of your ThunderClan. Why have I never heard of you? You shouldn't be an abandoned child, right?" Qinchuan looked at Rengar, curiously, as if he was really curious about Rengar's background. However, Qinchuan didn't know that his words could be said to have poked Rengar's sore spot. Rengar was indeed an abandoned child of the ThunderClan. Because he was an illegitimate child, he couldn't obtain the approval of the ThunderClan. Therefore, he was expelled from the ThunderClan very early on and had been wandering outside. It was also because of these tragic early years that Rengar thirsted for power, which led him to this day step by step. In Rengar's plan, he would come to the ThunderClan as a supreme existence and make those who had bullied and humiliated him in the past all pay a painful price. But the appearance of Qinchuan caused some unforeseen events to occur in his plan. When Qinchuan was crossing the Thunder Tribulation, Rengar, who was in seclusion, sensed Qinchuan's existence. He wanted to use the Thunder Tribulation to kill Qinchuan, but things didn't develop as he expected. The Thunder Tribulation couldn't kill Qinchuan, so Rengar wanted to do it himself. However, at the last moment of the tribulation, Qinchuan used the runic sword to stab him. He spent a lot of time and energy, but he couldn't recover from the injuries caused by the runic sword. It wasn't until the Sage Emperor found him and helped him recover that he was able to appear and find Qinchuan. Rengar knew that the Sage Emperor helped him because he wanted to use him to deal with Qinchuan. Rengar didn't feel disgusted because in his plan, once he recovered from his injuries, he would immediately find trouble with Qinchuan. Since the Sage Emperor's plan was the same as his, he didn't mind doing the Sage Emperor a favor. Therefore, Qinchuan must die. When he heard that Qinchuan guessed his identity as an abandoned child, Rengar became even more determined. If Qinchuan continued to live, then there was no meaning in him becoming a supreme existence. Crackle. Rengar didn't want to have any more words with Qinchuan. He planned to directly attack. When Rengar swung his lightning whip at Qinchuan, Qinchuan dodged while asking, "You're using a whip to whip people. Do you have any special hobbies?" Rengar ignored Qinchuan and only attacked. However, Qinchuan was like a chatterbox, constantly nagging. "Hey, why are you so irritable? Can you calm down a little? Let's talk about the illegitimate child, okay? Whose illegitimate child are you? Why doesn't your father want you anymore? Is it because you grew too fast and ate too much, so he can't afford to raise you? Why are your eyes red? Did you not sleep well last night?" Rengar didn't feel good as he listened to Qinchuan's words. He was about to go crazy. "Do you think you're like a dog? A stray dog?" Qinchuan had keenly noticed that Rengar was particularly concerned about the illegitimate child. The more Rengar cared about it, the more Qinchuan wanted to incite Rengar in this regard. Although it felt a little cheap and a little talkative, in order to win, Qinchuan didn't care about whether this method was despicable or not. That's enough. When Qinchuan stabbed Rengar in the heart again, Rengar finally couldn't hold back the anger in his heart. He roared and released all of his demigod power, vowing to crush Qinchuan into pieces. When he saw Rengar release a large amount of demigod power, Qinchuan's eyes suddenly lit up and he quickly retreated. However, although Qinchuan retreated quickly, Rengar's attack came even faster. In the blink of an eye, the demigod power surged in front of Qinchuan and hit Qinchuan. However, the moment the demigod power hit Qinchuan, Qinchuan's body suddenly erupted with the power of the law of thunder and the power of the void. Rumble! The roar of thunder resounded through the world, and a terrifying power swept in all directions. In the shattered space, a huge ball of lightning was constantly jumping, exuding a heart-palpitating pressure. Qin Chuan was in it with his eyes closed, as if he was sleeping, but also as if he was comprehending something. In the distance, Rengar looked at the scene in front of him, and his eyes were about to pop out. He didn't expect that his all-out attack would not only fail to kill Qin Chuan, but it would also help Qin Chuan. Rengar was furious when he saw the demigod power gathering around Qin Chuan being offset bit by bit. This damn bastard, what method did he use? Rengar was furious, but more than that, he was deeply afraid. He had never met an opponent as difficult to deal with as Qin Chuan, such a strange opponent. The power of a demigod would definitely have a crushing effect on an ordinary tribulation stage cultivator. However, against Qin Chuan, it was as if Rengar's demigod power had met its nemesis. It was almost useless. It's the law of thunder. He's using the law of thunder to offset my demigod power, and even absorb it. Finally, Rengar understood everything. Rengar's demigod power came from the law of thunder, and Qin Chuan also controlled the law of thunder. When he used the demigod power evolved from the law of thunder to attack Qin Chuan, it was equivalent to using a basin of water to splash another basin of water. It couldn't cause any harm to the other basin of water, and instead, it would increase the volume of the other basin of water. It was like feeding the enemy. Chapter 1332. Just as Rengar had thought, Qin Chuan was borrowing the power of the law of lightning and void energy to offset the demigod's power that Rengar had released. At the same time, he was also attempting to absorb and control this demigod's power. However, this was also a choice that Qin Chuan was forced to make. If he didn't choose this method to offset Rengar's demigod's power as much as possible, then he definitely wouldn't be a match for Rengar. Qin Chuan had been provoking Rengar with his words and infuriating him so that Rengar would spare no effort to release all the demigod's power in order to kill him. In this way, even if Rengar realized that this was a trap, it would be useless. Fortunately, Rengar's demigod's power was evolved from the law of thunder. Otherwise, Qin Chuan really wouldn't know how to deal with Rengar. However, although Qin Chuan had already planned everything, he still felt very strenuous and even a little dangerous when facing the attack of Rengar's demigod's power. However, he had already expected this, so Qin Chuan didn't panic at all when facing the encirclement of the demigod's power. It's still too strenuous to rely on my own ability to offset the demigod's power. With my power of the void, I can't support it until I've offset or digested all the demigod's power. Qin Chuan frowned. He needed a way to help him share the pressure. Just as Qin Chuan was thinking about this, the little armored dragon suddenly drilled out of Qin Chuan's forehead. At this time, the little armored dragon's body was bare, and it looked a little dispirited. When Qin Chuan saw the little armored dragon appear, his heart skipped a beat. He quickly asked the little armored dragon, "Little armored dragon, can you devour the demigod's power?" During the battle with Kasisna, Qin Chuan borrowed the little armored dragon's carapace and turned it into the Holy Monarch armor. During the battle, the Holy Monarch armor was shattered by Kasisna, so the little armored dragon was also affected to a certain extent. It had been recuperating in Qin Chuan's body. Now, the little armored dragon suddenly appeared because it was attracted by the demigod's power. The little armored dragon had a premonition that if it could devour the demigod's power, not only could it regrow its carapace, but it would also make its carapace stronger. "I want to eat it." The little armored dragon unreservedly expressed its desire for the demigod's power to Qin Chuan. Upon hearing the little armored dragon's power's response, Qin Chuan immediately sent a small portion of the demigod's power to the little armored dragon. The little armored dragon opened its mouth and swallowed the demigod's power, chewed hard, and digested it. After Qin Chuan's SSS, The little armored dragons and, after digesting this portion of it, the littles more. The little armored dragon roared at Qinchuan. It was eager to devour more demigod power. Qinchuan was overjoyed when he saw this. He immediately sent more demigod power to the little armored dragon. This time, the little armored dragon's devouring speed was even faster than before. With the little armored dragon sharing the demigod's power for Qinchuan, the pressure on Qinchuan was greatly reduced. While this made Qinchuan feel relaxed, it also made Rengar very irritable. It was one thing for Qinchuan to absorb the demigod's power, but he still had to feed it to his pet. Rengar was furious. He had lived for thousands of years, but he had never been as angry as he was now. Seeing that the demigod's power could no longer affect Qinchuan, Rengar wanted to withdraw the demigod's power. However, this was not a simple matter. Otherwise, Kasisna would not have cherished his demigod's power so much and been reluctant to use it so easily. Rengar approached the demigod's power in humiliation. Then, he used the power of the Law of Thunder to connect with the demigod's power. He wanted to absorb the demigod's power like Qinchuan. However, Rengar did not have the power of the void to neutralize the demigod's power. Therefore, the demigod's power was particularly irritable when Rengar tried to absorb it. Sizzle! The demigod's power entered Rengar's body through the bridge built by the Law of Thunder. Almost instantly, it caused great damage to Rengar's body. If Rengar hadn't stopped absorbing the demigod's power in time, he would have been seriously injured on the spot. This time, Rengar was so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. He was the one who released the demigod's power. Now, Qinchuan could offset the destructive power of the demigod's power and absorb it, but he, the owner of the demigod's power, could not do it. This was too frustrating. Why? Rengar racked his brains, but he could not figure out what was going on. However, he was sure of one thing. If he continued to forcibly absorb the demigod's power, he would definitely suffer even more serious injuries. Just thinking about it made Rengar, a 9-foot-tall man, feel sad. As a demigod, he came full of confidence. He thought that he could easily crush Qinchuan, seize the power of the Law of Thunder from Qinchuan, and become an ultimate existence. However, he never expected that after he gave Qinchuan a chance to say his last words, things began to develop in a direction that was out of his control. Rengar, who had always been domineering, had not experienced such an uncomfortable feeling for a long time. If God gave him another chance, he would not give Qinchuan any chance and kill Qinchuan immediately. However, it was too late to say this now. He no longer had the demigod's power, and Qinchuan was absorbing the demigod's power. Once Qinchuan finished absorbing the demigod's power, he would definitely turn around and deal with him. However, when he thought about having to face the attack of the demigod's power that he released and was absorbed by others, Rengar felt a lump in his chest. It was suffocating. Go, I have to go. Rengar made an extremely difficult decision, and that was to temporarily retreat strategically. He would wait until his demigod's power recovered in the future to find trouble with Qinchuan. Without the help of the demigod's power now, he might not be a match for Qinchuan. Moreover, Qinchuan was also proficient in the Law of Thunder, the Law of Space, and the Law of Time. It would be too difficult for him to kill Qinchuan. At the thought of this, Rengar no longer hesitated. He turned around and left. At this moment, Qinchuan was trapped in the demigod's energy. Before all the demigod's energy was neutralized or absorbed, he couldn't come out. Therefore, he could only watch as Rengar left. After nearly 2 hours of offset and absorption, Qinchuan finally got rid of all the demigod's power and regained his freedom. Chapter 1333. Phew, it's finally over. Qin Chuan finally breathed a sigh of relief after dealing with the demigod's power. Qin Chuan turned his gaze towards the little armored dragon that was flying in front of him. When he saw the shell that was gradually growing on the little armored dragon's body, he heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. All along, he did not know how to help the little armored dragon recover as quickly as possible. Today, it could be said that he had unintentionally planted a willow and it had turned into a shade. After the little armored dragon had its fill, it flew around Qin Chuan twice before returning to Qin Chuan's body to rest. Qin Chuan glanced at the direction where Rengar left, then turned around and chased after Chiron and the others. Meeting Rengar here today was unexpected for Qin Chuan. This made Qin Chuan realize that Zerg might know more about him than he thought. Although Rengar did not reveal anything, Qin Chuan could guess that someone from Zerg must have asked Rengar to deal with him. The person who asked Rengar for help must have known that there was a grudge between him and Rengar. If not for this, Rengar's bad temper would have made it difficult for anyone to ask for his help. However, Qin Chuan was also glad that the person Zerg asked for help was Rengar. If it wasn't Rengar who came today but another demigod, Qin Chuan might really be in danger. Probably even Zerg did not expect that Rengar's demigod's power would be restrained by Qin Chuan. The only thing that made Qin Chuan feel a little regretful was that although he had absorbed a portion of the demigod's power from Rengar, this demigod's power was very limited. It could only be used once, and it could not be recovered. So Qin Chuan had to think carefully about how to use the demigod's power that could only be used once. Just as Qin Chuan was reflecting on the experience of this battle, he also caught up with Chiron and the others through the dimensional travel. When they saw Qin Chuan's figure walking out of the dimensional portal, Chiron and the others were very happy. Qin Chuan, are you okay? Thelon, as Qin Chuan's closest friend, immediately began to ask about Qin Chuan's situation when he saw Qin Chuan. Qin Chuan smiled and said, "I'm fine." Sharmila asked again, "What about that guy? Did you kill him?" Hearing Sharmila's question, Chiron and Thelon were very curious. After all, that was a demigod. The last time Qin Chuan could kill a demigod, it was because of the help of the Arcane Church. This time, if Qin Chuan could kill a demigod alone, it meant that Qin Chuan's combat power was second only to that of the ultimate existences. Qin Chuan shook his head and replied, "I didn't kill him. We stopped here." Qin Chuan thought for a moment and felt that this description was more appropriate. If he had to be specific, it would probably be because he was weaker and couldn't do anything to Rengar. Rengar had used all of his demigod power and still couldn't kill him, so he could only retreat temporarily. Hearing Qin Chuan's answer, although everyone felt that it was a pity that Qin Chuan couldn't kill the demigod who was obviously on the opposite side, they also felt that it was reasonable. If Qin Chuan could really kill a demigod alone, then Qin Chuan's growth rate was a little too fast. Although you didn't kill that demigod, you were able to escape unscathed from that demigod. That's already very impressive. Thelon looked at Qin Chuan and couldn't help but feel emotional. He felt that the gap between himself and Qin Chuan was getting bigger and bigger. Hearing Thelon's words, Qin Chuan didn't know what to say because he was purely lucky to be able to escape unscathed from Rengar. Let's not talk about this and continue on our way. Although Qin Chuan had just experienced a battle, in fact, he didn't expend much energy and could continue on his way. Just as Qin Chuan and the others continued on their way to the Iki Nebula, Rengar took the initiative to contact the Saint King. "I failed." When Rengar said these words, he felt incomparably humiliated in his heart. It had been too long since he had failed. Hearing Rengar's words, the Saint King was extremely calm. He said plainly, "I know." Rengar was a little puzzled when he heard this. He asked, "You know? How did you know that I would fail?" The Saint King replied plainly, "Although you are a demigod, your power is concentrated in the law of lightning. The power of a demigod is also derived from the law of lightning. Qin Chuan also controls the law of lightning. If you want to kill Qin Chuan, of course it won't be that easy. Since you know that I will fail, why do you still want me to deal with Qin Chuan? Rengar was very puzzled. He felt that the Saint King had a deeper meaning. The Saint King smiled faintly and said, "This is just a casual move of mine. If you can kill Qin Chuan, it's naturally a good thing. If you can't kill him, it doesn't matter. This will only deepen the conflict between you and Qin Chuan and force you to side with us. I still welcome a demigod to join us." Rengar's expression suddenly changed when he heard the Saint King's reply. He coldly said, "Are you scheming against me?" The Saint King didn't care about Rengar's anger. He calmly said, "This is not a scheme. I'm just pointing out a clear path for you. You want to kill Qin Chuan and then seize Qin Chuan's power, but you can't kill Qin Chuan. In this situation, don't you need someone to help you do this? And I or we are a very good choice." When Rengar heard the Saint King's words, he couldn't help but turn silent. The Saint King was right. He did need someone to help him kill Qin Chuan. If Qin Chuan didn't die, it would be very difficult for him to become a supreme existence. Moreover, he had completely offended Qin Chuan this time. In the future, there would be no possibility of reconciliation between him and Qin Chuan. In this situation, he could only rely on the Saint King. After thinking through these things, Rengar took a deep breath and said to the Saint King, "I agree to join you, but I have a condition." The Saint King wasn't surprised by Rengar's choice. He looked at Rengar and said, "What is your condition? When Qin Chuan arrives at the Iki Nebula, you have to personally kill him." Rengar said in a deep voice, "I know you have the strength to do so." The Saint King chuckled and said, "No problem. Then it's settled. You don't have to come back now. Go directly to the Deus Cluster. I want you to kill your way through the Deus Cluster and destroy the 6 billion soldiers of the Endless Allied Army." Chapter 1334. Iki Nebula. Iki Planet. Sky Emperor's face was livid as he looked at the image sent back from the Wade Galaxy in the Iki Nebula. A huge black bug was wreaking havoc in the Wade Galaxy. Wherever it went, life would be destroyed. Not only would people be killed, but even the energy in the planet's core would be sucked out and devoured by this demon bug. How did this devil bug appear in the Iki Nebula? Why didn't our intelligence personnel notice it at all? The Sky Emperor was furious. They were still on alert, but a devil bug suddenly appeared behind them and wreaked havoc in the Iki Nebula. If this matter was not handled properly, the entire Iki Nebula would be in chaos. We are already investigating, but no one knows how the devil bug appeared in the Wig Galaxy. Elder Tian-Si said helplessly, "Maybe Zerg hid this devil bug in the Iki Nebula a long time ago, but it was only activated recently. Well, the investigation can wait. We must get rid of this devil bug now." The Sky Emperor looked at the devil bug with a frown and said to Tian-Si, "What about Tian-E? Is he confident that he can get rid of this devil bug?" Tian-Si thought for a moment and replied, "There is a chance, but let Tian-Wu and Tian-Lu go together. It will be safer." Hearing Tian-Si's suggestion, the Sky Emperor thought for a moment, but suddenly shook his head and said, "No, I suspect this is Zerg's trap. This devil bug seems to be only at the peak of the form synthesis stage. Tian-E can get rid of it alone, but there is no reason why Zerg can't think of something we can think of." Tian-Si frowned slightly and said, "So, what should we do?" "You guard the front line. I will do it myself," the Sky Emperor said in a deep voice. "Even if Zerg has other tricks up his sleeve, I can easily deal with it. Even if I can't defeat him, I can still escape." Hearing the Sky Emperor's words, Tian-Si immediately said, "But will this be dangerous?" As the leader of the Tian people, the Sky Emperor's importance was self-evident. If anything happened to the Sky Emperor, it would be a great blow to the Tian people. The celestial Thearch's face was cold, and his tone was extremely serious. In this special period we can't be overcautious. Only I can deal with the devil bug as quickly as possible. Seeing that Sky King had made up his mind, Tianxi stopped trying to persuade him. He could only hope that Sky King would be careful and not fall into Zerg's trap. When the Sky Emperor left for the Wig Galaxy, the devil bugs had already turned half of the Wig Galaxy upside down. Hundreds of millions of ordinary people had died under the attacks of the devil bugs. In just half a day, the Sky Emperor arrived at the Wig Galaxy. He looked at the planets that had been ravaged by the demon insects and revealed a dilapidated and desolate aura. The Sky Emperor's face could not help but become extremely gloomy. In just 2 days, the Wig Galaxy had become like this. This devil worm must be dealt with as soon as possible. The Sky Emperor followed the traces left behind by the devil bug and finally found the devil bug on a planet. At this time, only half of the devil bug's body was exposed. Most of its body had drilled into the planet and was extracting the energy from the planet's core. When the Sky Emperor saw this, he immediately took out a silver-gray long saber and slashed at the devil bug. The saber chi, formed by celestial force, pierced through the universe and crossed a distance of millions of miles in an instant. It accurately landed on the devil bug's body. However, to everyone's surprise, the Sky Emperor's saber failed to cut through the devil bug's body. The saber was blocked by a layer of carapace outside the devil bug's body. This devil bug has such a strong defense. The Sky Emperor was a little surprised. The long saber in his hand was a high-grade sacred artifact. When activated by him, it was supported by celestial force. It should be easy for him to kill a devil bug that was only at the peak of the combination stage. However, his attack was blocked. Although the saber did not cause any harm to the devil bug, it successfully angered the devil bug that was eating. The devil bug twisted its bloated body and drilled out of the planet. It turned its head and glared at the Sky Emperor in the distance with dozens of pairs of angry eyes. An evil aura rushed toward him. Looking at the devil bug's ferocious appearance, the Sky Emperor frowned slightly. He felt that this devil bug was a little strange, so he did not intend to waste time on this devil bug. He decided to kill it directly with his strongest means. Thinking of this, the Sky Emperor took out a sparkling and translucent token. This was the symbol of the Sky Emperor, the ruler of the Tian people. It was called the Sky Emperor Token. It was a top-grade sacred artifact. Like Qinchuan's heavenly demon seal, it was only one step away from becoming a divine artifact. As the symbol of the ruler of the Tian people, the Sky Emperor token had a strong offensive power in addition to its own significance. By the order of the Sky Emperor, the devil bug shall be killed. As the Celestial Emperor's dignified voice resounded through the universe, the Celestial Emperor token suddenly emitted a hazy light. Then, one figure after another slowly appeared around the Celestial Emperor. They were the heroic spirits of the celestial race powerhouses of the past, as well as the eternal guardians of the celestial race. When the dozens of figures appeared around the Sky Emperor, the Sky Emperor said in an extremely serious tone, "Heroic spirits, please kill the devil bug." Whoosh! After hearing the Sky Emperor's words, the dozens of heroic spirits directly attacked the devil bug. Some of them used weapons, and some of them were barehanded. However, without exception, the aura of each of them was above the crossing calamity stage. In the face of the attacks of these dozens of heroic spirits, the devil bug could do nothing but twist its bloated body and hiss. In just a moment, the devil bug died under the siege of the heroic spirits. After the devil bug died, the expression on the Sky Emperor's face became a little strange. He thought that the devil bug must have some special secrets, but now it seems that he thought too much. The devil bug seemed to be used by Zerg to disturb their rear, and had no other purpose. After the heroic spirit killed the devil worm, it slowly dissipated. The celestial Tharch bowed slightly to show his respect and then prepared to leave. At this moment, two figures suddenly flew out of the devil worm's corpse and headed straight for the celestial Tharch. Dong! A huge silver-white shield suddenly appeared in front of the Sky Emperor, blocking the attack of the two figures. The Sky Emperor slowly turned around and looked at the two figures who tried to attack him. He said in a deep voice, "Green Shell, Qingyu, so it's the two of you." Zerg, who was called Green Shell by the Sky Emperor, sneered and said to the Sky Emperor, "We have always been curious about which big fish would be waiting for us. We didn't expect that it would be you. The Sky Emperor has to deal with such a small matter in person. It's too embarrassing." Chapter 1335. Faced with Liu Bei's mockery, Sky Emperor didn't say anything. He looked at Liu Bei and Qin Yu and frowned. "When did the two of you reach the tribulation passing stage?" In the Celestial Thearcha's impression, although Liu Bei and Qin Yu were generals of the insect army, they should be at the form synthesis stage. However, Liu Bei and Qin Yu's auras were clearly at the crossing calamity stage. Hearing Sky Emperor's words, Liu Bei laughed. "Times have changed, Sky Emperor. In the past, tribulation passing stage cultivators were indeed rare. But now, aren't tribulation passing stage cultivators everywhere?" Speaking of this, Liu Bei sneered and said, "You don't think that we don't know that your sons and daughters have advanced to the crossing calamity stage, do you?" Hearing Liu Bei's words, the Sky Emperor's face changed slightly, and he said in a deep voice, "You sent people to stop them? That's not necessary." Liu Bei smiled. "They are with Qinchuan. We aren't stupid enough to send people to deliver food to Qinchuan." Now, Qinchuan's strength was known to all. Apart from demigods who could suppress Qinchuan, no one in the tribulation passing stage was a match for Qinchuan. Sky Emperor agreed with Liu Bei's words. With Qinchuan around, Qailong and the others shouldn't be in any danger. Even if they were in danger, they should be able to turn the misfortune into a blessing. I say, don't worry about them. Worry about yourself. Liu Bei looked at Sky Emperor with an evil gaze. "Don't tell me you think I'm chatting with you because I'm in a good mood." Tiandi turned his head and looked at Qin Yu, who had been silent the whole time. He said indifferently, "I know you're waiting for Qin Yu to make his move." Liu Bei raised her eyebrows. "Since you know, why are you so confident that you won't do anything?" Just as Liu Bei's voice fell, light green array glyphs suddenly appeared around the Heavenly Emperor. These array glyphs were arranged together, seeming to be an extremely powerful combination of array glyphs. Seeing this combination of glyphs, Liu Bei smiled proudly and said, "All of you know that Qingyu is a very strong warrior, but very few of you know that Qingyu's strongest point is actually glyphs, right? I might as well tell you, Qingyu is the only 8th level talisman formation master in our divine race." The strength of a Tier 8 talisman formation master was extremely strong. By relying on talisman formations, he could contend against a supreme existence of the tribulation passing stage. If this talisman formation master was a supreme existence of the tribulation passing stage, then his combat strength would definitely be considered outstanding among all the supreme existences of the tribulation passing stage. What kind of talisman formation? The Heavenly Emperor was also considered to be experienced and knowledgeable, but this was his first time seeing this talisman array combination. This talisman formation combination is called the Azure Universe formation. Qingyu, who had been silent all this while, suddenly opened his mouth and said in an extremely stiff tone, "This is a combination of talisman arrays that I developed on my own. It's a trap array. However, the Qingyu formation can not only trap enemies, but also release a kind of mucus to erode the trapped people. Even a supreme existence in the tribulation stage will be eroded into a pile of bones in 10 days. As soon as Qingyu finished speaking, the light green talisman formations suddenly darkened. Then, a stream of mucus gushed out and shot toward the Sky Emperor. A hazy halo suddenly lit up around the Sky Emperor, blocking the mucus that was spurting toward him. Qing Yu didn't take this to heart and said indifferently, "This is useless. You can't draw energy from the outside world to replenish yourself in the Azure Universe formation. When your immortal energy is depleted, that will be the time of your death." Sky Emperor didn't panic at Qing Yu's words. He had lived for tens of thousands of years, and as a Sky Emperor, he had seen all kinds of situations. How could he be frightened by Qing Yu's words? Seeing Sky Emperor so calm, Liu Bei chuckled and said, "I'm very curious to see how long you can stay calm." Liu Bei seemed to have thought of something and said playfully, "Don't tell me you're waiting for Qin Chuan and the rest to come and save you? Don't think about it, this Azure Universe formation can be moved. We'll take you out of the Iki Nebula and return to Messy Rock Star. We'll hand you over to the Sage Emperor." Liu Bei thought that the Celestial Emperor would be affected by his words, but the Celestial Emperor was surprisingly calm. Seeing that the Celestial Emperor didn't have any reaction, Liu Bei couldn't be bothered to say anything more and said to Qing Yu, "Let's go. We'll take this guy back to see the Sage Emperor." When Liu Bei and Qing Yu left with Sky Emperor, Qin Chuan and the rest had yet to arrive at the Iki Nebula. At this time, bad news came from the Silver Ring. Under the attack of the demon army, although the various forces of the Silver Ring had organized a resistance army and tried their best to resist, they were still defeated one after another. Not to mention the loss of soldiers and generals, more than half of the Silver Ring had been ravaged by the flames of war and had become a paradise for the demon army. When the news of the Silver Ring reached the front line of the Deus Cluster, the people who had been suppressed by Qin Chuan with great difficulty became restless again. Every soldier from the Silver Ring could no longer suppress the worry in their hearts, and began to ask the higher-ups of the endless allied army to send troops to rescue the Silver Ring as soon as possible. Under such circumstances, they couldn't care less about the Demon Alliance. What was the point of fighting when their home was about to be destroyed? There were even deserters among the endless allied army. When Yaorao's intelligence unit caught several deserters, Chen Chongqing's mood could be said to be extremely angry. He wasn't angry because of these deserters, but because of the commanders of the various forces of the Silver Ring. These low-level soldiers couldn't understand the situation, but could it be that those commanders also couldn't see the situation? These people were clearly deliberately conniving their subordinates to cause trouble, hoping to take this opportunity to break away from the endless allied army and stay away from the battlefield. These people are simply bastards. Chen Chongqing was extremely angry, but he couldn't do anything about it because the matter of the Silver Ring was indeed a big problem. Having heard what was said, Yaorao indifferently said, "At that time, I had advised Qin Chuan to be ruthless to those people, so that they would be scared of him, so naturally they wouldn't dare to cause trouble. But last time in the wave wheel incident, Qin Chuan only punished the main culprit, which made them realize that Qin Chuan is a soft-hearted person. Otherwise, do you think they would dare to tolerate their subordinates causing trouble?" Chen Chongqing sighed and said, "Then what should we do now?" Yaorao pondered slightly and said to Chen Chongqing, "I suggest that we capture the leader first." Chapter 1336. On the way to the Iki Nebula, Qin Chuan had been in contact with the front line of the Deus Cluster. When he learned that deserters had appeared in the Alliance army, Qin Chuan immediately realized the seriousness of this matter and asked Chen Chongqing to deal with this matter seriously and not tolerate it. "Boss, Yaorao and I are already doing so. We have arrested those people from the Silver Ring who are secretly causing trouble and temporarily imprison them." Hearing Chen Chongqing's answer, Qin Chuan was relieved and responded, "You did the right thing. It seems that I don't have to worry about it." There were 3 supreme existences in the transcending tribulation stage in the Endless Alliance army. They were Pope Saint Baudelaire, Lu Zi, and Zhou Lin. The three of them were firmly on Chen Chongqing's side. Even if Pope Saint Baudelo had other ideas, Lu Zi and Zhou Lin were enough to protect Chen Chongqing and let Chen Chongqing's orders be carried out smoothly. Boss, how's the situation on your side? Compared to the front line, Chen Chongqing felt that the situation on Qinchuan's side was worse. Qinchuan replied, "There are no big problems on my side. We will arrive at the Iki Nebula soon." At this moment, Qinchuan suddenly received a call request from Elder Tianyi. Qinchuan hurriedly ended the call with Chen Chongqing and then connected to Tianyi's call request. Before Qinchuan could say a few words, Tianyi directly said, "Qinchuan, don't come to planet Iki. Go directly to the Wig Galaxy. The Heavenly Emperor went to the Wig Galaxy to deal with the matter of the Devil Bug and has lost contact with us." Hearing Tianyi's words, the expression on Qinchuan's face suddenly changed and he asked, "When did this happen?" "Just a day ago. Our people in the Wig Galaxy could no longer contact the Heavenly Emperor," Tianyi said to Qinchuan. "We suspect that the Heavenly Emperor was ambushed by Zerg." "I know. If there are no other accidents, we will bring the Celestial Emperor back." Qinchuan's expression was extremely grave. As the leader of the Tian people, the Celestial Thearcha's position was extremely important. Nothing could happen to him at this time. Qinchuan ended his call with Tianyi and then noticed that Kailan and the other two were looking at him with extremely solemn gazes. Thilan was the most agitated and could not help but ask, "Father, did something happen?" Qinchuan nodded and said to the three of them, "Elder Tianyi told me that Lord of Heaven went to the Wig Galaxy a day ago to deal with the Devil Bug. After that, we lost contact with him. We suspect that he was ambushed by Zerg. He hopes that we can go to the Wig Galaxy to investigate this matter." Hearing Qinchuan's words, Thilan immediately said, "Then what are we waiting for? Let's go." Qinchuan shook his head and said to Thilan, "Don't be too agitated. Let me finish." Thilan suppressed the uneasiness in his heart and said to Qinchuan, "Sorry, I was too agitated. You go first." Qinchuan glanced at Sharmila and Kailan, then said, "It's been a day since the incident happened. I think that Zerg will continue to stay in the Wig Galaxy and wait for us to find him. The possibility of that is not high, so I suggest that we split into two groups. Thilan, Sharmila, and I will go to the Wig Galaxy to investigate this matter. Kailan, you will follow the route from the Wig Galaxy to Rubble Star and search for any traces that the other party might have left behind. If you find anything, don't act rashly. You must inform us immediately and wait for us to arrive before taking action." Qinchuan knew that it was dangerous for Kailan to search for traces of Zerg along the way alone, but he could only let Kailan do this alone because both Thilan and Sharmila were too impulsive. He was worried that once they found traces of Zerg, Thilan and Sharmila would not be able to resist immediately and make things worse. After hearing Qinchuan's words, Kailan immediately understood what Qinchuan was thinking. He nodded and said, "I'll be careful." After Kailan left, Thilan looked at Qinchuan with a complicated expression and asked, "Qinchuan, do you think that I'm an irresponsible person?" Qinchuan looked at Thilan and shook his head. "You're overthinking it. Let's go." Without waiting for Thilan to say anything, Qinchuan directly opened a space portal and headed towards the Wig Galaxy. In space, Green Shell and Qingyu were moving towards Rubble Star at a moderate speed. Between the two of them was Sky Emperor, who was trapped in the Qingyu Great Formation. Although he was a prisoner, Sky Emperor's expression was extremely calm. He did not seem like a person who had no choice. It's been a day. The Tian people should have realized that something is wrong with Sky Emperor. Liu Bei glanced at Qingyu, then turned her gaze to the surroundings, as if looking for traces of the Tian clan people. Qingyu nodded and said indifferently, "It's useless even if they find out. No one can break my Qingyu Great Formation." Qingyu paused for a moment and then added, "Except for myself." Liu Bei chuckled and said, I know. You're the strongest talisman formation master in the universe. Even that fellow Qin Chuan's attainments in the Tao of talisman formations are absolutely inferior to you. Ever since Qin Chuan's level increased, he rarely continued to fight with talisman formations. Therefore, almost everyone thought that Qin Chuan's talisman formation Tao was still at the 7th level. Who would have thought that Qin Chuan would become the second person after you to reach the spirit focus stage? For others, the limit of a talisman formation master might be the 8th level, but for Qin Chuan, there were 9 levels above it. However, a talisman formation master of the 8th level was extremely rare in the universe. It was even rarer than the supreme beings of the tribulation stage. It was no wonder that Qingyu was so arrogant and conceited, thinking that no one could break his Qingyu Great Formation. While Green Shell and Qingyu were moving forward, Kalen's figure was rapidly moving hundreds of thousands of miles behind them. However, Kylon was very careful along the way. He didn't forget to hide his figure and presence at all times, trying his best not to attract anyone's attention. A day later, Kylon finally discovered Green Shell and Qingyu. At the same time, he also saw Sky Emperor imprisoned in the Qingyu Great Formation. At that time, he almost rushed out impulsively. Fortunately, he calmed down in time and told Qin Chuan about his discovery. He hoped that Qin Chuan could use spatial travel to rescue Sky Emperor as soon as possible. After receiving Kalen's news, Qin Chuan immediately used spatial travel to the coordinates sent by Kylon with Thelon and Sharmila. Kylon, who was monitoring Green Shell and Qingyu, didn't know that Qingyu had already discovered him. Chapter 1337. Liu Bei secretly looked behind her and said to Qingyu, "That guy hasn't made a move yet. He's probably waiting for reinforcements." Qingyu lightly nodded and transmitted his voice. "The only person who can reach here before we return to Chaotic Rock Star is Qin Chuan, who has mastered the art of spatial travel." It was no longer a secret that Qin Chuan had mastered the art of teleportation. Furthermore, with the Heavenly Emperor being captured by them, as long as the Tian clan was not stupid, they would definitely send their strongest people to chase after them. Obviously, Qin Chuan was the best choice. Liu Bei chuckled and sent a voice transmission to Qingyu. "I'm really looking forward to the scene when I see Qin Chuan." It's said that he instantly killed Guru back then. Qingyu snorted. "Guru is just a piece of trash." This time, Qingyu didn't say anything because he could sense that Qin Chuan, Thelon, and Sharmila had already appeared. Since the fish had taken the bait, there was no need to continue. Liu Bei and Qingyu had known each other for many years. Qingyu's reaction made Liu Bei realize that Qin Chuan and the others were already here. While Liu Bei was thinking about this, Qin Chuan's group of 3 had already met up with Kylon. Then, they used spatial movement to arrive before them, blocking their path. Seeing Qin Chuan and the other 2 walking out of the spatial portal, Liu Bei's face revealed an exaggerated expression of fear. She loudly shouted, "Wow, the pursuers of the celestial race are here, it's really scary." Qingyu glanced at Liu Bei, whose acting was too exaggerated, and didn't want to sleep with her. His gaze was indifferent as he stared at Qin Chuan. "You must be Qin Chuan, right?" Qin Chuan did not immediately answer Qingyu's question. He first took a serious look at the Qingyu Great Array that imprisoned the Heavenly Emperor, and he said in surprise, "I didn't expect that there would be such a powerful talisman array master in your insect race." As he spoke, Qin Chuan looked at Qingyu and said, "Just now, I sensed an extremely strong mental strength discovering us. It should be you." Qingyu frowned at Qin Chuan's words and asked, "When did you find out that I found you?" "That's not important. What's important is that if you have any hidden moves, you can use them now." Qin Chuan looked around and said, "I didn't see anyone ambushing around here. Are you sure it's just the 2 of you?" "The 2 of us are enough to deal with you." Liu Bei chuckled, appearing very relaxed. He might not be strong enough and did not have the qualifications to go head-to-head with Qin Chuan, but Qingyu definitely had the qualifications. "Let my father go!" Thelon roared at Liu Bei. He was furious as he looked at Sky Emperor imprisoned in the Qingyu formation. As the ruler of the Tian people, Sky Emperor had never been humiliated like this. "Qin Chuan, don't waste time talking to them. Just kill them." Sharmila stared sharply at Qingyu. Since this formation was created by Qingyu, she would kill Qingyu to avenge Sky Emperor. Kylon looked at the imprisoned Sky Emperor and asked, "Father, are you okay?" The Sky Emperor, who was imprisoned in the Qingyu Grand Formation, heard Kai Long's concern and gently shook his head. "I'm fine." Hearing heaven and earth's answer, Kylon heaved a sigh of relief and turned his gaze to Qin Chuan. "What should we do now?" Qin Chuan had already expanded the range of his spiritual power to the limit, but he still couldn't find any traces of Zerg. After thinking for a while, he said to Kylon, "Let's save Sky Emperor first." Right when Qin Chuan's group was about to attack, an enormous silver-white talisman formation suddenly lit up beneath their feet. Qin Chuan's expression changed slightly when he saw it. "It's a teleportation talisman formation." Buzz. 4 figures slowly appeared from the teleportation formation. Without exception, all 4 of them were at the tribulation stage. Qin Chuan and the others' expressions changed when they saw the 4 figures appear. Zerg really had a backup plan. "Are you surprised? Are you surprised?" Liu Bei looked at Qin Chuan with a smile. Her face was full of pride after her plan succeeded. Qin Chuan completely ignored the smiling Liu Bei. He looked at Qingyu and asked, "How did you inscribe the formation in an instant?" No matter how strong a formation master is, there should be spiritual power fluctuations when inscribing the formation. With Qin Chuan's strong spiritual power, Qingyu definitely couldn't hide from him when he was inscribing the formation. However, he didn't know anything about Qingyu's actions. This was very strange. Qingyu said calmly to Qin Chuan's question, "No comment." "Haha, we really caught a big fish." The 4 tribulation stage cultivators who had just teleported over blocked Qin Chuan and the others' escape route. They looked at Qin Chuan and the others as if they were looking at a few dead people. Although they had all heard of Qin Chuan's glorious deeds, no matter how strong Qin Chuan was, there was no way he could face 6 tribulation stage cultivators at the same time. Moreover, Qingyu was among them. Seeing that they were surrounded by Zerg, Kalen's face couldn't help but become extremely gloomy. He looked around and said to Qin Chuan, "We're surrounded now. Should we break out?" At this time, Kylon didn't think about saving Sky Emperor anymore. This wasn't because he was cold-blooded, but because they were clearly at a disadvantage now. If they tried to save Sky Emperor in this situation, Zerg's evil plan would succeed. They had to live to have a chance to save Sky Emperor next time. Although Tai Long and Sharmila were very unwilling, they had to face reality. They were like clay bodhisattvas crossing a river. They could barely protect themselves. It was already good enough that they could protect themselves. They had no spare energy to save the celestial Dharch. "Let's break out." Since they know Qin Chuan is here and aren't afraid, they clearly have a way to deal with Qin Chuan. Sharmila looked at Qin Chuan. With their strength, they could barely hold back 3 tribulation stage cultivators. However, Qin Chuan had to face 3 opponents alone. One of them was a powerful talisman formation master who was as difficult to deal with as a demigod or even stronger. This was too difficult for Qin Chuan. "Is this your backup plan?" At that moment, the Sky Emperor, who was imprisoned in the Qingyu Grand Formation, suddenly spoke. He looked around and seemed a little regretful. Hearing Sky Emperor's words, Liu Bei's expression changed slightly. "What are you trying to do?" Sky Emperor pursed his lips and said regretfully, "My original intention was to fish the Holy Emperor out. I didn't expect to only catch a few small shrimps like you. What a pity." Chapter 1338. Liu Bei's expression darkened when he heard the Celestial Emperor's words. He subconsciously glanced at Qingyu, only to discover that Qingyu was also frowning, as if he was thinking about something. The Qingyu array is fine now. You can't escape. Qingyu was very confident. As long as the Qingyu array was fine, the Celestial Emperor wouldn't be able to escape no matter how capable he was. The Celestial Emperor ignored Qingyu and looked at Qinchuan. Do you have a way to solve this problem? Qinchuan smiled. That's not difficult. Qingyu snorted coldly at Qinchuan's words. He was about to speak when the Qingyu array that trapped the Celestial Emperor suddenly shattered inch by inch. Qingyu's expression finally changed when he saw this. He cried out involuntarily, "That's impossible!" Qingyu couldn't believe that his proudest creation, the Qingyu array, had shattered just like that. Liu Bei was equally shocked. He had been partners with Qingyu for so many years, but this was the first time he had seen someone break Qingyu's Qingyu array. Now, because the Celestial Emperor had escaped, the situation had suddenly become 5 against 6. Originally, their greatest reliance had been Qingyu's talisman array, but now that Qingyu's talisman array had been restrained by Qinchuan, their original advantage had instantly become a disadvantage. How did you do it? Qingyu stared fixedly at Qinchuan with a ferocious expression. This was the first time he had encountered such a situation since he became an 8th grade array master. Qinchuan smiled at the crazed Qingyu. You're an 8th grade array master, but I'm a 9th grade array master. That's impossible. Qingyu screamed again. He absolutely didn't believe that a 9th grade array master existed in this universe. An 8th grade array master was the limit. Spiritual power simply couldn't reach that level. Qinchuan smiled at Qingyu's incredulous expression. Just because you don't believe it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Understand? Even though Qinchuan was a 9th grade talisman array master, his expertise was limited to the Tao of lightning arrays. However, this was enough for Qinchuan to be proud of. As for breaking Qingyu's talisman array, it was not difficult for him to do so with the strength of his spiritual power. Looking at Qinchuan's solemn expression, Qingyu felt that his confidence had completely collapsed. He originally thought that a Tier 8 talisman array master was the limit of the talisman array Tao, but now someone was telling him that there was a Tier 9 above Tier 8. He didn't want to believe in Qinchuan's words, but Qinchuan easily broke the Qingyu Grand Array that he was most confident in. The facts were right in front of him, so he couldn't have any wishful thinking. So level 8 isn't the limit. There's still level 9 above it. But why do I feel the existence of a ceiling? Qingyu murmured. His eyes were unfocused, and his mind seemed to have suffered a great impact. Qinchuan smiled. Since he could destroy an enemy's confidence with just a few words, he didn't mind saying a few more words. Thinking of this, Qinchuan said, "You feel the existence of a ceiling because you can only go so far. Your talent is lacking. Your talent is lacking." When he heard these words from Qinchuan, Qingyu felt as if his entire mind had collapsed. Since the beginning, he'd always considered himself to be a peerless genius in the Tao of talisman formations, and the people in his surroundings thought the same. Everyone felt that he would become one of the strongest talisman formation masters in history and become the glory of the clan. However, a peerless genius like him had been evaluated as lacking natural talent by others today. Qingyu's gaze was lost, and his mind was in chaos. Liu Bei was shocked when she saw this scene, and she hurriedly said, "Qingyu, don't listen to his nonsense. It's impossible for him to be a level 9 talisman array master. There's absolutely no level 9 talisman array master in this world." Qingyu calmed down slightly when he heard this, and then he asked Liu Bei, "If he isn't a level 9 talisman array master, then how was my Azure Universe Grand Formation broken?" Liu Bei was dumbstruck by Qingyu's question, and she didn't know how to answer it. At this moment, the people in the surroundings felt extremely strange when they saw this scene. They clearly came to rescue Qingyu, and the other came to ambush him. How could it have inexplicably become like this? But then again, they didn't want Qingyu's confidence to collapse. So long as they dealt with Qinchuan, then they believed that everything would be fine. Right when everyone was about to make a move against Qinchuan, an enormous azure talisman diagram suddenly appeared above them. This talisman diagram was profound and complicated, and the aura it emitted was extremely shocking. This is... Qingyu raised his head to look at the talisman diagram above him. He'd never seen a talisman diagram with such shocking might. The strength of this aura far surpassed a level 8 talisman diagram. Moreover, only a level 9 talisman diagram that he'd never heard of in the past was capable of accomplishing this. Qinchuan really is a level 9 talisman array master. Not to mention Qingyu, even Thelon and the others who were familiar with Qinchuan were slightly stunned when they saw this talisman diagram. Earlier, they'd thought that Qinchuan had fooled Qingyu with a few words, but it turned out that there really was a level 9 talisman array master in this universe. When faced with the extremely astounded gazes of everyone, Qinchuan said indifferently, "This is the level 9 talisman array that I possess, and it's called the Fury of the Lightning God." Rumble. As soon as Qinchuan's voice fell, a series of thunderous roars resounded from the talisman diagram. Under everyone's shocked gazes, a figure as large as a planet slowly emerged from the talisman diagram. This person held a huge hammer in his right hand and an awl in his left. The aura he exuded was astonishing, comparable to that of a demigod. Is this a level 9 talisman array? There really is a level 9 talisman array. Qingyu couldn't help but tremble when he saw the lightning god formed by the power of thunder. This wasn't because of fear, but because he was excited because he'd found a way forward. However, at this moment, the lightning god raised the huge hammer in his hand and struck the awl in his left hand. A thick bolt of lightning struck the trembling Qingyu from the awl. In the next moment, Qingyu seemed to have evaporated from the world and disappeared. Hiss! Everyone felt their scalps go numb when they saw this scene. Qingyu was reduced to ashes with just one strike. The power of this level 9 talisman array was a little too terrifying. Liu Bei was completely stunned. Qingyu was standing right beside him, but he disappeared without a trace. The lightning strike was so precise that it didn't affect him at all, but he couldn't help but feel endless fear in his heart. Boom! When the sound of the second hammer falling sounded, the green clam was also turned into ashes. Chapter 1339. The God of Thunder swung his hammer twice, and the two supreme existences at the crossing calamity stage were reduced to ashes. No one present had ever seen such a horrifying scene. Everyone was shocked by the power of the level 9 charm array called the Wrath of the God of Thunder. Is this the level 9 charm array? And it's a battle array. This power is really a little too frightening. Thelon was really shocked. The crossing calamity stage was known as the Supreme Existence, but in front of Qinchuan, what was the difference between them and ants? Not long ago, he was still fantasizing about fighting with Qinchuan to see how big the gap was between him and Qinchuan. Now, he had completely dispelled this idea. He was really afraid that if Qinchuan was careless and didn't hold back, he would be dead. Just thinking about that scene made Thelon a little scared. Gulp. Chiron swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and the expression on his face was also very interesting. He was most grateful that when Qinchuan was still weak, the Tian people had formed a deep friendship with Qinchuan. They had always been very good to Qinchuan. He really couldn't imagine how frightening it would be if Qinchuan became their enemy. The most frightened people were Zerg and the other 4 supreme existences at the crossing calamity stage, who came through the transmission array. They were originally full of confidence, but now, in the face of the god of thunder's hammer and all, they felt that even if they had 1,000 lives, they wouldn't be able to survive. As the most outstanding genius of the Tian people in the past 1,000 years, Sharmila had always been placed high hopes on. She also didn't disappoint. She smoothly advanced to the crossing calamity stage and became one of the strongest among the Tian people. However, compared to Qinchuan, her radiance was a little dim. The Sky Emperor looked at Qinchuan in a daze. Even though he was experienced and knowledgeable, he was still shocked by the amazing strength displayed by Qinchuan. He thought that this should be his chance to show off his skills and show the world the power of the ruler of the Tian people. He never thought that the person who showed off his skills would be Qinchuan, and this development was a little too incredible. For a moment, the Sky Emperor wondered if Qinchuan was the reincarnation of a supreme existence. Run! No one knew who shouted, but the 4 supreme existences at the crossing calamity stage of Zerg turned around and fled in 4 different directions almost at the same time. They really didn't dare to stay around Qinchuan for a moment longer. Dong! When the god of thunder's hammer hit the all again, one of the supreme existences at the crossing calamity stage of Zerg was immediately turned into ashes. Before he died, he didn't even make the slightest sound. This scene frightened the other 3 supreme existences at the crossing calamity stage, and they ran even faster. However, they didn't notice that the god of thunder's hammer didn't hit the all for the 4th time, and the huge talisman array slowly dissipated. It wasn't that Qinchuan didn't want to kill all the supreme existences at the crossing calamity stage of Zerg, but it was because the god of thunder's wrath only had 3 chances to attack, and every time it attacked, it would draw a large amount of immortal energy from his body. Now, he didn't have much energy to continue chasing after the escaping Zerg. When the god of thunder's wrath disappeared, the Sky Emperor and the others instantly understood that the god of thunder's wrath couldn't attack without limit. If there really was no limit, the power of the talisman array was a little too terrifying. Qinchuan, are you okay? Sharmila looked at Qinchuan, very concerned about Qinchuan's condition. Qinchuan shook his head and said, "I'm fine." As he spoke, Qinchuan turned his head to look at the Sky Emperor and said, "Senior, even if we didn't come to save you, you should have a way to escape, right?" Hearing Qinchuan's words, Thelon looked at Qinchuan in surprise, then looked at the Sky Emperor, as if he was doubting whether Qinchuan was telling the truth. The Sky Emperor looked at Qinchuan with a strange gaze and said, "I did let them capture me on purpose. I originally thought that with my status, I would be able to attract the Sage Emperor, but I didn't expect that I overestimated my status among the Sage Emperors." Qinchuan shook his head and said, "Perhaps the Sage Emperor didn't appear not because he didn't value Senior, but because he was too cautious." Speaking of this, Qinchuan asked the Sky Emperor curiously, "Senior, do you have a way to deal with the Sage Emperor?" In fact, it wasn't just Qinchuan who was curious about this question. Kylon and the others were also very curious about this question. Since the Sky Emperor had a way to break through the Qingyu Great Formation, but he still allowed himself to be captured and went to meet the Sage Emperor, it was obvious that he was prepared. The Sky Emperor nodded and said, "I do want to meet the Sage Emperor and fight with him, but I don't plan to go to Zerg's base. I want to see if he will appear in the ambush." Hearing this, Qinchuan asked again, "If we didn't come, Senior, do you have the confidence to break through this situation?" The Sky Emperor didn't answer Qinchuan's question. He smiled and said, "I knew you would come." Seeing that the Sky Emperor didn't seem to want to answer this question, Qinchuan didn't ask any more questions. The group prepared to return to planet Iki. On the way back, the Sky Emperor had already contacted Tianyi, who finally heaved a sigh of relief. On the other side, the Sage Emperor had also heard about the development of the situation from the survivors. He wasn't surprised that Qin Chuan could save the Sky Emperor, but what really surprised him was that Qin Chuan was a level 9 talisman formation master. In the historical records, there had never been any mention of a level 9 talisman formation master. Even Ren Huangyu, who created the talisman formation system, had never heard of him becoming a level 9 talisman formation master. Qin Chuan is a level 9 talisman formation master. The talisman formation he inscribes can kill a tribulation stage expert in one blow, and no one noticed when Qin Chuan started inscribing the talisman formation. The talisman formation is complete when it appears, the Sage Emperor muttered. He sighed and said, a level 9 talisman formation master, and a battle formation master at that. This kid's actual combat strength should be infinitely close to that of a paragon stage expert. In the Sage Emperor's opinion, if Qin Chuan had used this level 9 talisman formation against Rengar, there was a high chance that Rengar would have died in Qin Chuan's hands. However, the Sage Emperor could guess that Qin Chuan must have been restricted by other conditions when he obtained such terrifying strength. Otherwise, Qin Chuan would be ridiculously strong. A combat strength infinitely close to that of a paragon stage expert is ultimately not a paragon stage expert. The Sage Emperor pursed his lips and said, as long as you haven't taken that final step, I have a way to kill you. At this thought, the Sage Emperor said to Blackface, who was standing beside him, give the order to launch an attack on the Iki Nebula. Also, get the demon race to move as well. Don't let the Endless Alliance army idle. Upon hearing the Sage Emperor's words, Black Mask immediately replied, yes. Chapter 1340. Universe Calendar, Year 14. 61 million, April. The Demon faction once again launched a counterattack against the Endless Allied Army. The Endless Allied Army fought and retreated back to the Deus Cluster. Zerg's 2 billion troops attacked the Iki Nebula at the same time, winning and losing against the Tian people. The Second Tian People's army assembled and rushed to the Silver Ring. When the news reached the front line of the Deus Cluster, the morale of the Endless Allied Army was temporarily stabilized. On the other side, the Demon Race's army immediately began to build fortifications and capture civilians. They were ready for a protracted war. Qin Chuan did not stay idle. After understanding Zerg's situation, Qin Chuan decisively attacked and killed dozens of Zerg's overlords and thousands of Dongshu stage cultivators. These people could not even withstand a single blow from Qin Chuan. Although Qin Chuan's actions were considered to be bullying the weak, it was a time of war. In order to win the war, Qin Chuan did not care about these things. It would be a waste of time to talk to the enemy about these things. In the face of Qin Chuan's unreasonable actions, Zerg could only be infuriated. Because of the previous incident, none of the Zerg's tribulation stage cultivators were willing to face Qin Chuan. Therefore, in the absence of the Sage Emperor, no one could restrain Qin Chuan. This situation caused Zerg's plan to attack the Iki Nebula to come to nothing. Messy Rock Star. Huichou accompanied the Sage Emperor to inspect the logistics base. Along the way, they saw many soldiers retreating from the front line with haggard expressions. Huichou wanted to say something, but when he saw the Sage Emperor's expressionless face, he could not bring himself to say anything. After inspecting the logistics base, Hui Qian said to the Sage Emperor, in the past half a month, a total of 46 body integration stage cultivators and thousands of Dongshu stage cultivators have died at the hands of Qin Chuan, as well as countless others. Hearing Hui Chang's words, the Saint King slowly turned his head and looked at him. He asked, "You want to ask why I didn't kill Qin Chuan, or why I didn't let the supreme existence of the Tribulation Pass stage stop Qin Chuan?" Hearing this, Huichou lowered his head slightly and said, "Ordinary supreme beings in the Crossing Calamity stage are no match for Qin Chuan. Going against Qin Chuan is just suicide." In other words, Huichou was asking why the Sage Emperor did not personally take action. In response to Hui Chang's question, the sage emperor asked, "Do you know that the celestial emperor was captured?" Hui Chang nodded and said, "I know. If not for Qinchuan's sudden appearance, we would have been able to capture the celestial emperor alive. This is definitely a good thing. Unfortunately, Qinchuan is too strong." Hearing Hui Chang's words, the sage emperor looked deeply at Hui Chang and asked, "Do you really think so?" Hui Chang was stunned for a moment, as if he did not understand the sage emperor's meaning. The sage emperor pursed his lips and said to Hui Chang, "The celestial emperor is the ruler of the Tian people. You should know how important his status is to the Tian people. I don't need to say more. Do you think the celestial emperor is someone who would be captured so easily?" Hui Chang's face revealed a trace of surprise. He said, "Could it be that there is a deeper meaning to this? The celestial emperor allowed himself to be captured on purpose." The sage emperor said to Hui Chang, "He wants to see me. Even if he can't see me, he will kill a few supreme existences of our divine race to weaken our strength." The sage emperor paused for a moment at this point and then he continued, "If it wasn't for Qinchuan, I would have been able to see the celestial emperor's true strength. Unfortunately, I missed the opportunity." Hui Chang was extremely shocked when he heard the sage emperor, and he said, "How could the celestial emperor dare? Isn't he afraid of overreaching himself? The more daring he is, the more confident he is." The sage emperor said to Hui Chang, "Perhaps he's waiting for me to deal with Qinchuan. Once I show myself, he'll definitely show himself." Could it be that the celestial emperor has already? Hui Chang gazed at the sage emperor with an extremely interesting expression. The sage emperor pursed his lips and said, "When I suddenly changed from the sage ruler to the sage emperor, someone as sharp as the celestial emperor should have noticed something. Since he has the courage to be captured alive and wants to use this opportunity to test me, it means that he's confident enough to stop me." The sage emperor sighed at this point and he said, "The celestial emperor and I have been old rivals for many years. I understand him, and he naturally understands me as well." Hui Chang couldn't help but frown when he heard the sage emperor, "But wouldn't that mean that we'll never be able to suppress Qinchuan?" "No, there's a way." The sage emperor shook his head and said, "The method is already on the way to the Deus cluster." Hui Chang thought for a moment and said with surprise, "The method you speak of, is it Rengar?" The sage emperor nodded and said, "Rengar is a demigod. No one in the Deus cluster is a match for him. Once Rengar reaches the Deus cluster and participates in the war, the Deus cluster will definitely ask for help from Qinchuan. Once Qinchuan leaves the Iki Nebula to deal with Rengar, we'll be able to do whatever we want." Hearing the sage emperor's explanation, Hui Chang came to a realization and said, "So you've already predicted all this and made arrangements. Things might not develop in the direction I've predicted." The sage emperor pursed his lips and said, "God Apollo is a very big threat. I don't think that he's only at the tribulation stage. At the very least, he should be a demigod." Hui Chang was a little worried when he heard this and said, "If God Apollo is a demigod, then with him around, Qinchuan won't need to go back to the Deus cluster to help." The sage emperor nodded and said, "So I've prepared another plan." "What plan?" Hui Chang was very curious. This was the first time he realized that the sage emperor was so powerful. He could think of all aspects and plan for them. Qinchuan's greatest weakness is the humans and demons. It's their starting point. The sage emperor said to Hui Chang, "I've already arranged for some people to go to the starting point. Xian Yi will lead them." Hui Chang asked, "You're going to let Xian Yi control the humans and demons and force Qinchuan to leave the Iki Nebula and return to the starting point?" The sage emperor nodded again and said, "That's right. The humans and demons that have been killed can't threaten Qinchuan. Only the humans and demons that are alive can be used." Hui Chang looked at the sage emperor with admiration and said, "You're really amazing. You're actually so thoughtful. The sage emperor glanced at Hui Chong and said, I've already passed the period where I like to be flattered. You, on the other hand, should think about how to become a demigod. In the near future, anyone below the demigod level will be cannon fodder. Chapter 1341. In the Deus Cluster. In the past, Rengar had traveled to the Deus Cluster for a period of time. At that time, what he saw was a prosperous and powerful Deus Cluster. Whether it was the Protoss or the other races living in the Deus Cluster, their faces were filled with smiles, sincerity, and friendliness. Only when they faced outsiders or enemies would they show a look of vigilance. This time, when he came to the Deus Cluster, he saw a bleak scene everywhere he passed. On the faces of the survivors who had experienced the flames of war, he saw only numbness and indifference. Seeing this, Rengar knew in his heart that this was the pain and suffering brought to the ordinary people by the war. If there was no war, when this thought appeared in his mind, Rengar shook his head. There were not so many ifs in this world. Since the war had already broken out, he had to face it head-on, and not think about running away from it. However, no matter how the war ruined the Deus Cluster, it had nothing to do with Rengar. Furthermore, in the near future, he would make the war even crazier, and make the ordinary and innocent people suffer the torment of war once again. Suddenly, Rengar, who was moving forward, stopped. He looked at the figure in red who was slowly walking towards him with a subtle expression on his face. Master God Apollo. Rengar softly called out the name of the newcomer. He and Master God Apollo were not strangers who had never met before. In the past, when Rengar came to the Deus Cluster, he had met Master God Apollo once. At that time they had a very good chat, but no one would have thought that after a few hundred years, they would actually be on opposite side. Long time no see, Thunder King. You're still as handsome as before. Master God Apollo looked at Rengar with a calm expression and greeted him as if he was an old friend who had not seen each other for many years. Upon hearing Master God Apollo's words, Rengar sighed and said, How did you know I was here? The God Star Cluster is the territory of the only true God, Ares. As the spokesperson of the god, I have the duty to clean up some unstable factors for the god. Apollo replied calmly. Rengar frowned slightly and said, In that case, it was the one true god, Atheus, who gave you a divine decree to find me? Apollo nodded and said to Rengar, It's not too late for you to back out now. Upon hearing Apollo's words, Rengar could not help but reveal a bitter expression. He said helplessly, As a demigod, if I had a choice, why would I be willing to be someone else's lackey? Is there something you can't tell me? God Lord Apollo looked at Rengar and waited for his reply. Rengar looked at Apollo and asked, If I wanted to kill Qinchuan, would you help me or stop me? Or would you remain neutral and not help either side? Upon hearing Rengar's words, Apollo was silent for a moment and then he replied, I can't lie to you. If you continue to be enemies with Qinchuan, then I will stand on Qinchuan's side and be your enemy. Although Qinchuan had many conflicts with the One God religion in the past and had even killed a cardinal, Qinchuan had saved hundreds of millions of soldiers of the One God religion and helped the One God religion recover the Deus Cluster. The One God religion was indebted to him. Even if the debt did not offset the debt, Apollo could not ignore Rengar, being enemies with Qinchuan. At the very least, Qinchuan was now an ally of the One God religion. As for how they would get along after the war, that was not something that needed to be considered now. Qinchuan's importance to the endless allied forces was self-evident. Therefore, if Rengar insisted on being enemies with Qinchuan, Apollo would definitely not let Rengar get what he wanted. Rengar laughed when he heard Apollo's honest answer. I've already guessed this. In that case, there's nothing more to say. Let's have a fight. If you can defeat me, I'll leave. Rengar said. Then, he turned to Apollo and laughed. In the city of starting point. As the first commander-in-chief of the city of starting points, Knight Serenity was probably most fortunate to have met Qinchuan. If she had not met Qinchuan, she might not have been able to advance to the form synthesis stage, or she might have died in a battle. It was Qinchuan who changed her fate. Every time he stood on the top of a tall building and saw the pedestrians and vehicles coming and going in the city, Yu felt very satisfied. Under her governance, although the city of Starting Point could not be said to be a place where people lived and worked in peace and prosperity, at least it could be said that people lived and worked in peace and prosperity. Da-da-da. A crisp sound of high heels hitting the ground sounded behind Knight Serenity. Long Xiao walked slowly and stood beside Knight Serenity. She said to Knight Serenity, "I've just finished inscribing the last rune of the defense charm array. It's a success." Hearing Long Xiao's words, Knight Serenity turned her head and smiled at Long Xiao, saying, "Thank you for your hard work during this period." Long Xiao shook her head and said, "I was once determined to become a powerful charm array master. It's my fortune to have the opportunity to inscribe such a powerful defense charm array." Speaking of this, Long Xiao sighed and said, "However, I don't want Qinchuan's worries to come true." Not long after Qinchuan advanced to the crossing calamity stage, he contacted Long Xiao, who stayed in the city of Starting Point to study charm arrays. He passed a defense charm array to Long Xiao and asked her to inscribe the defense charm array in the city of Starting Point according to the diagram. In the past year, Long Xiao worked day and night and finally completed the inscription of the defense charm array. In the past year, Long Xiao gained a lot, but at the same time, she also had a lot of worries. Now, the city of Starting Point was Long Xiao's home, and also the home of all the human and monster clans. If possible, Long Xiao absolutely did not want the city of Starting Point to experience what happened to Star Dragon City. She hoped that everyone living here would be happy and safe. The war is still going on. Anything can happen. Knight Serenity also sighed and said to Long Xiao, "Qinchuan has done too many earth-shattering things in the past period. Now that he is in the limelight, it's normal if someone wants to use the city of Starting Point to threaten Qinchuan." Long Xiao nodded slightly and said, "So, we have to be prepared early." Just as Knight Serenity and Long Xiao were chatting, Bluepool, who was in charge of the city of Starting Point's intelligence system, hurried over with a solemn expression. He looked at Knight Serenity and Long Xiao and said in a deep voice, "Senior Knight Serenity, Long Xiao, in the past 2 days, many unfamiliar faces suddenly appeared in the city of Starting Point. I caught some of them and found out that they are Zerg's spies." Chapter 1342. After hearing Bluepool's words, Knight Serenity and Long Xiao's expression immediately turned serious. "I'll activate the defensive talisman formation now." As the only person who knew how to activate the defensive talisman formation, Long Xiao decided to activate the defensive talisman formation as soon as possible to prevent any accidents from happening when Zerg's attack arrived. Knight Serenity nodded at Long Xiao, then said to Bluepool, "Capture all of these unfamiliar faces and try not to alarm the people." After Bluepool left, Knight Serenity said to Long Xiao, "What you're worried about is indeed going to happen. Zerg wouldn't send a large number of spies to the city of Starting Point for no reason. They must have a plan, and Zerg's plan was nothing more than to break into the city of Starting Point and threaten Qinchuan with their lives or to kill them to vent their anger. But no matter what the result was, it wouldn't be good for them. Should we inform Qinchuan?" Long Xiao looked at Knight Serenity and hesitated. "It's just that it hasn't happened yet. If we tell Qinchuan about it now, wouldn't it be too sensitive?" Knight Serenity shook his head and said, "There's nothing wrong with being careful. Moreover, we can't let anything happen to the city of Starting Point. If we wait until something really happens to the city of Starting Point and tell Qinchuan about it, it might be too late. We don't need to say much, we just need to tell Qinchuan the truth. Long Xiao nodded and said, "Okay, we'll do as you say." When Knight Serenity told Qinchuan about the appearance of a large number of Zerg spies in the city of Starting Point, Qinchuan had just returned from the battlefield. Qinchuan didn't gain much from this attack, because Zerg had learned to be smart. As long as he encountered Qinchuan, he would retreat. Moreover, any cultivator above the Dongshu stage would definitely not appear in front of Qinchuan. It was impossible for them to appear within 10,000 miles of him. After learning about what happened in the city of Starting Point, Qinchuan wasn't too worried because he had already learned from Long Xiao that the defensive talisman formation had been completed. With this defensive talisman formation, even a supreme existence in the tribulation stage wouldn't be able to easily break into the city of Starting Point. However, nothing was absolute. Qinchuan still decided to return to the city of Starting Point in the near future. Firstly, he wanted to make sure that there was no problem with the defensive talisman formation. Secondly, he wanted to find the Zerg lurking inside and outside the city of Starting Point. Therefore, when Qinchuan explained the situation to the Sky Emperor, the Sky Emperor didn't stop him. However, he still gave Qinchuan a suggestion. When you return, you must be very secretive. Even the people you trust the most shouldn't know that you have returned. It's not that I don't trust the people around you, but I'm worried that Zerg will be everywhere. Qinchuan listened to the Sky Emperor's suggestion carefully. Once Zerg knew that he had left the Iki Nebula, Zerg would definitely do something new. Therefore, he had to hide it from Zerg as much as possible and return to the city of Starting Point as soon as possible. After solving the problem, he would return to the Iki Nebula. With the speed of Qinchuan's space travel, it would only take 10 days for him to return to the city of Starting Point. Even if he took the time to deal with other matters, he could still return within half a month. After making the decision, Qinchuan did not hesitate and immediately returned to the city of Starting Point. Less than half a day after Qinchuan left, the Holy Emperor on Messy Rock Planet received the news that Qinchuan had left the Iki Nebula and returned to the city of Starting Point through a secret channel. Holy Emperor, your prediction was right. Qinchuan left the Iki Nebula in a hurry and returned to the city of Starting Point after learning that a spy from the Holy Race had infiltrated the city of Starting Point. Grissom looked at the Holy Emperor with admiration. She felt that there was no one smarter than the Holy Emperor in the universe. The Holy Emperor had really calculated everything. The Holy Emperor looked at Grissom and said, "Have someone confirm the authenticity of this information. Then have the army get ready. In 2 days we will attack the Iki Nebula. Also, have Xian Yi, who was hiding near the city of Starting Point, bring her people back. Since Qinchuan has returned, it will be very dangerous for them to continue hiding near the city of Starting Point. As for the spies in the city of Starting Point, leave them to Qinchuan to vent his anger. It would take Qinchuan at least 10 days to return to the city of Starting Point. During this time, they must take down the Iki Nebula and point their weapons at Stansos. 2 days later, Zerg led an army of 2 billion under Blackface's command and charged towards the Iki Nebula. They engaged in a fierce battle with the Tian people. On the Tian people's side, other than the Sky Emperor, there were only Kylon, Thelon, and Sharmilla. On the other hand, Zerg had a total of 5 Tribulation Transcendent. In terms of combat power, Zerg had a huge advantage. Because of the presence of the Sacred Emperor, the Celestial Emperor could not easily take action. This caused the Celestial race to be at a disadvantage from the very beginning of this battle, and this disadvantage continued to expand as time passed. Planet Iki. Tian Yi was sitting in the command center. He had a serious expression as he methodically gave out orders. The Sky Emperor sat beside Tian Yi. His expression was calm, as if he did not care about the outcome of the battle. After Tian Yi finished a new round of arrangements, He sighed and said to the Sky Emperor, "Behind the Iki Nebula is the Lank Nebula and Stansos. No matter what, we cannot lose the Iki Nebula. If we have no other choice, I hope the Sky Emperor can personally make a move and suppress everything." Hearing Tian Yi's words, the Sky Emperor shook his head and said, "If the Holy Emperor does not make a move, I will not make a move." Tian Yi frowned and said, "But if you do not make a move, we will definitely lose." Right now, Kylon, Thelon, and Sharmilla were fighting bravely. However, with their strength, they could only block 3 Zerg's Tribulation Transcendent. Furthermore, there were still 2 Zerg's Tribulation Transcendents wreaking havoc on the battlefield. Wherever they went, there would be a storm of blood. If these 2 Tribulation Transcendents were allowed to continue killing, it would not be long before they were completely defeated. Once they were truly defeated, it would be a problem whether they could safely bring the remaining people back to the Lank Nebula. Faced with Tian Yi's difficulties, the Sky Emperor was silent for a moment. Then, he said to Tian Yi, "Don't worry. Someone will make a move." Hearing the Sky Emperor's words, Tian Yi was stunned and asked, "Who will make a move?" The Sky Emperor calmly replied, "Qin Chuan." Tian Yi was surprised. Didn't Qin Chuan return to the capital of Starting Point? The Sky Emperor nodded and said, "Qin Chuan is indeed returning to the capital of Starting Point. However, it will not be 2 days ago. It will be after this battle ends." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.